Chapter 11. Hearing that Ai Zhongwen had recommended someone who could beat Mo Yuan, Zheng Sun's face lit up. I wonder which junior apprentice brother Ai is referring to, and where is he now? Ai Zhongwen replied, this person is called Zhang Yan, a disciple of the Good Abyss Monastery. Because he has been in seclusion recently, he has not come to the assembly. I believe he is still cultivating in seclusion. I hope senior apprentice brother can bestow the golden sword of Howling Lake and invite him here. The golden sword of Howling Lake was one of the 5 elements. Martial cultivators could use it to send messages over long distances. It was a common communication method used by the upper house disciples, but the lower house also had some, but they were all in the hands of the first disciple, Zheng Sun, and were usually not used unless there was an emergency. Zheng Sun was a little puzzled. I know that the disciples of the Good Abyss Monastery mostly live on Moon Seizing Peak, which is connected to Drifting Clouds Peak by 3 ropeways. It is only a quarter of an hour's journey from here, so why use the golden sword? Ai Zhongwen continued, first, this person lives on the 15th peak, Stargazing Peak. Sending someone to invite him to Drifting Clouds Peak and back will take several hours, possibly until tomorrow. Second, this person is not an ordinary disciple and cannot be ordered around. Using the golden sword is a sign of seriousness, so I hope he will stop his seclusion and come quickly. Zheng Sun was puzzled. Although the 15th peak, Stargazing Peak, was also under the name of the Good Abyss Monastery, it was usually disciples without any foundation who cultivated there. Why would someone recommended by Ai Zhongwen live there? He pondered for a moment, then asked, this disciple's surname is Zhang. Is it the Fengyan Zhang, the eternal Kun Zhang, or the Mianzi Zhang? Ai Zhongwen slowly shook his head. He did not know Zhang Yan's real background. Although he knew that he was the son-in-law of the Zhou clan, it seemed that Zhang Yan did not want to publicize his background, so he could not go around announcing it. Otherwise, they would become enemies instead of friends, so he could not answer this question. Just as Zheng Sun was about to ask something, someone suddenly interrupted, is this person from our Xianmen aristocratic family? Ai Zhongwen could not say it clearly, so he could only tactfully say, senior apprentice brothers need not worry. This person's background is extraordinary, and cannot be judged by common sense. That person sneered and said, what do you mean by that? He's just a registered disciple who doesn't know what he's doing. You actually used a golden sword to invite him. I think senior brother Ai has been in the mud for too long that you've forgotten where you came from. He cupped his fists at Zheng Sun and said, senior martial brother Zheng, I know this Zhang Yan. About half a day ago, he humiliated senior martial brother Hu's steward and cheated him of a secret book of scriptures and poems. Senior martial brother Hu, am I right? He turned to look at Hu Xingyu with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Sitting on the first seat to Zheng Sun's left was Lin Yuan from the Good Abyss Monastery. He said slowly, I've also heard my clan brother Lin Tong mention this person. It's said that he's just a registered disciple without any background. He's only relying on the erosion symbol deduction technique he learned from who knows where to deceive some ignorant people. The disciples on both sides were seated according to their cultivation. Hu Xingyu also sat on the seat to the front on the right. He had a gloomy personality and was a proud and aloof person. He did not interact much with the other disciples and did not know about the matter between Bian Qiao and Zhang Yan. After hearing this, his expression immediately changed, and a faint killing intent flashed in his eyes. Ai Zhongwen cursed inwardly. He had originally wanted to use Zhang Yan to win against Mo Yuan, but he did not expect to cause trouble instead. After thinking about it carefully, he could not help but feel regret. He had been too concerned. He knew that these people only cared about his reputation, so why did he have to do something unnecessary? When Zheng Sun heard this, he immediately looked disappointed. He shook his head and did not say anything else. The disciples below him were even more indifferent. Those who were not disciples of aristocratic families were not in their eyes at all. Some of them even mocked Ai Zhongwen for not caring about his status and befriending lowly people. Originally, Ai Zhongwen had only come out to speak for the sake of his sect's reputation. The owner of the Dharma assembly had always reached the peak first, and he heard that the disciples of the Guangyuan sect and the Nanhua sect had already reached the foot of Mount Azure Wu. If he waited for them to reach the peak first, what face would Qinsung school have to speak of? Therefore, he could not dilly-dally anymore and had to make a decision quickly. He did not expect that his good intentions would be met with verbal humiliation. Everyone present did not care about the sect's honor and only cared about their sect's status. He was slightly annoyed and said, "I'm also a registered disciple, so it seems that I'm also an extra person. In that case, it's not convenient for me to stay here any longer. Senior brothers, farewell." He cupped his hands, swung his sleeves, and slammed the door as he left. Walking out of the side hall, he looked up at the lush pine and cypress trees on both sides, lofty and lofty. He thought, AI Zhongwen, am also proficient in eroding texts. Can't I achieve anything without this group of short-sighted people? I'll personally meet Mo Yuan and see if his name as a child prodigy is true. Thinking of this, a heroic spirit rose in his heart and he strode towards the second mountain gate alone. After walking less than 100 steps, Zhang Yan could not help but slow down and pondered, what did that Taoist priestess mean by that sentence? After reaching Essence Building Realm, his eyes and ears were very sharp. Of course, he could clearly hear the conversation between the Taoist priestess and Zhao Ying. Moreover, those words seemed to be meant for him to hear. The other party seemed to have deliberately come to pick a fight, but Zhang Yan's intuition told him that the other party would not be so superficial as to ask him such a question for no reason. There must be a reason behind it. Elephant River, overflows when it's too much, becomes round when it's too little. Zhang Yan frowned and pondered over it repeatedly. Suddenly, his footsteps stopped as he thought of a possibility. Could it be that she was talking about his cultivation? Thinking of this, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. It stood to reason that with the Lin Yao questioning method in his hands, even if his cultivation was not as smooth as before, it should still be able to improve. But he felt that although his internal qi was strong and thick, but no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to take a step further and step into the threshold of essence entering true. He had always thought that it was because his cultivation level was not high enough, but now that he thought about what the Taoist priestess had said and looked back at his own body, a trace of understanding arose in his heart. It seemed that it was not that his cultivation level was not high enough, but rather it was too much. The problem lied in the words, too much is as bad as not enough. As if a flash of lightning suddenly flashed in front of his eyes, Zhang Yan suddenly understood, the confusion in front of him disappeared for a moment. He could not help but burst into laughter and said, "So that's how it is, so that's how it is." He turned around and bowed in the direction of the Taoist priestess. Although the realms of the profound gate Tao techniques were known to everyone, but in fact, there were still some hidden traps. For example, at the step of essence building, it was said that there were two realms, namely, condensing essence and visualizing meaning, and essence entering true, but in fact there was another stage in between, called quenching essence and desolating desolation. After condensing essence and visualizing meaning, if one wanted to take a step further, the amount of yuan qi hidden deep within the internal aperture did not depend on the quantity, but whether it was pure or not. Cultivators who did not understand the key to this, would often spend several years or even more than 10 years to immerse themselves in bitter cultivation. As time passed, the fiery nature of the yuan qi would gradually dissipate, and finally condense into one, stepping into the realm of essence entering true, and then stepping into the meridian opening stage. But in this way, they would waste even more time, and unknowingly, they would be left far behind by those disciples who knew the key to this. It must be known that after opening the meridian opening stage, the cultivation of the secret art was different from before. The difference between high and low could not be measured in terms of Tao. If one was one step slower, then every step would be slower. If one did not have a great opportunity, and did not have outstanding qualifications, then there was almost no hope of catching up to those who were a step ahead. And if one was not from the profound sect aristocratic families, it was absolutely impossible for them to know the key to this. The step of quenching essence and desolating desolation was only taught privately between masters and disciples, passed down by word of mouth, and never written down in the Tao books. Even if there were, these books had been sealed and destroyed by the profound sect aristocratic families over thousands of years ago. It was precisely because of this kind of deliberate planning, and mutual tacit control, that each of the big aristocratic families controlled the path of cultivation in each sect. In fact, the profound sect aristocratic families' hands and feet in this area were far more than just this. For cultivators who did not come from an aristocratic family, the path of cultivation was really like walking on thin ice, one wrong step and there would be no turning back. Zhang Yan had his own shrewdness, and after a little thought, he vaguely guessed the possible reasons. That Taoist nun must have seen that his cultivation was at this threshold, but it was not good for her to say it directly, so she used an illusion to remind him. Although he did not know why she did this, he remembered this favor. Although Zhang Yan did not know how to quench essence qi, he had read the Xuandian in the past, and could roughly guess what problem he had encountered. He already had some ideas, and he was confident that with the remnant of the jade in hand, as long as he knew where the cause was, he would be able to find the correct method after a few attempts. Thinking of this, he could not wait to find a place to meditate and study it. At this moment, as if he had sensed something, he looked back and saw a familiar figure walking into his eyes. Ai Zhongwen was walking angrily on the mountain path, and when he raised his head, he was surprised to see Zhang Yan. A look of joy appeared on his face, and he hurriedly took a few steps forward, cupped his hands, and said, "So senior brother Zhang has been here for a long time, but did you also hear about Mo Yuan's matter, so you rushed over?" Zhang Yan did not understand, and asked, "Senior brother Ai, what's the matter?" Seeing that Zhang Yan did not seem to know, Ai Zhongwen sighed, and said, "Ai, it's a long story. Senior brother Zhang, please follow me, and I will slowly tell you." The two of them walked forward, talking as they walked. After walking for about 1,000 steps, Zhang Yan finally understood the whole story. However, what interested Zhang Yan was not that Mo Yuan, but that senior brother Chen Feng. Senior brother Ai is saying that senior brother Chen had the same cultivation as us that day, but he showed his prowess at the Dharma assembly, and opened his meridians soon after returning. Ai Zhongwen's eyes were filled with admiration, and he said, "Yes." Speaking of which, although this senior brother Chen had caused the disciples of the two sects to come and seek revenge, he had single-handedly stopped the disciples of the two sects from ascending the peak. This kind of heroism was still very admirable. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he faintly felt confident in his heart. He asked again, "Right now, how many disciples of the 16 sects are on the peak?" Ai Zhongwen shook his head, and said, "Our Qinsang school is the host after all, and the disciples of the other sects have to give us face. Therefore, they are all watching and have not made any moves. However, I heard that the disciples of Guangyuan sect and Nanhua sect have already reached the foot of the mountain, and I'm afraid they will ascend the peak today." At this moment, he raised his head, and said, "They're here." Zhang Yan looked up, and not far away, there was a 3-layered stone platform that could stand 100 people. On the highest stone platform, a purple copper incense burner was emitting green smoke in spirals. A pavilion made of beams was half embedded in the mountain wall, and about 100 disciples of the 3 sects were gathered there. The scene was extremely quiet. Coincidentally, Min Lu, who had not been seen since they parted ways at Yuqiong Peak, was also in the crowd. At this moment, his eyes were fixed on the scene, and his hands were clenched into fists, looking nervous. Zhang Yan and Ai Zhongwen stepped onto the stone platform in a few steps, and saw 2 people sitting opposite each other in the center of the platform, in front of a table. A middle-aged man in a Taoist robe was holding a bamboo chip in his hand, and was carefully deducing the etchings in front of him. However, his forehead was already slightly sweating. Ai Zhongwen said in a low voice, "This is senior brother Cheng of the Virtue Cultivation sect. Although he is also a registered disciple, he is from the Cheng clan of Hengchang, and is quite skilled in the Tao of etchings." Opposite senior brother Cheng was a young man, presumably Mo Yuan. He was about 13 or 14 years old, and there was light hair on his lips, and his brows were full of arrogance. Both of them had good eyesight, and could clearly see the etchings on the page between the two of them. Zhang Yan looked at the scattered bamboo chips in Mo Yuan's hand, and couldn't help but smile. AI Zhongwen looked carefully, and then he frowned, saying, "Not good." Sure enough, before long, senior brother Cheng's expression became dejected, and he pushed his table away. He shook his head and sighed, "Junior brother is wise, senior brother admits defeat." As soon as these words came out, Min Lu, who was standing to the side, couldn't help but stumble, as if he was the one who had lost. The corner of Mo Yuan's mouth curled up, and he snorted, saying, "Qinsang school is only so. The contempt and disdain in his words made the surrounding Qinsang school disciples feel like they had lost face, and many of them immediately showed expressions of anger. Since senior brother Cheng had admitted defeat, he naturally wouldn't say anything more and humiliate himself. He took out a small cloth bag and threw it in front of the young man, cupped his hands, and left. Zhang Yan didn't understand, and asked, "What's the meaning of this?" AI Zhongwen explained, "That's the glittering sand." That junior brother Mo came alone, and he was afraid that all the disciples would come forward to challenge him, so he made a bet that anyone who wasn't an inner disciple would have to take out a caddy of glittering sand as a wager. Glittering sand was a type of 5 elements divine sand. It was produced just now in places where the river water flowed rapidly, and it became rarer the longer it was deposited in the cracks of the rocks at the heart of the river. It was produced more in Qinsang school. Zhang Yan thought to himself that this Mo Yuan was also very calculative. Not only did he block the path of all the disciples, he could also use this as an excuse to make a small profit. Looking at the 5 small cloth bags on the table, this Mo Yuan had already won at least 5 times. Following that, a few more people went up, and all of them lost without exception. AI Zhongwen sighed, and said, "I'm not as good as this person." In the crowd, Min Lu stomped his feet angrily, and said, "Let's not mention all the inner disciples, just junior brother Zhang Yan alone would definitely be able to beat this kid." Although Min Lu's ancestors had once produced powerful cultivators, their family had long since declined, and they didn't value Zhang Yan's background as much as the inner disciples did. Hearing this, the originally somewhat dejected crowd seemed to wake up, as if they had found a life-saving straw. Whether or not they knew who Zhang Yan was, they all nodded in agreement. After all, they couldn't let Mo Yuan really laugh at Qinsang school for not having anyone capable. When Mo Yuan heard this, he raised his eyebrows, and sneered, "What senior brother Zhang? Do you dare to come out and meet me?" AI Zhongwen, who was standing beside Zhang Yan, suddenly turned his head to look at him, and there was some anticipation in his eyes. However, he was immediately disappointed. Not only did Zhang Yan not step forward bravely, but he also gave AI Zhongwen a look, and then turned to leave. AI Zhongwen was startled, and after a moment of hesitation, he followed. After walking a few hundred steps, Zhang Yan suddenly stopped, and turned back with a smile. "Senior brother AI, do you think that I, Zhang Yan, am getting cold feet?" AI Zhongwen forced a smile, and said, "Senior brother Zhang, there must be a deeper meaning behind your actions." Zhang Yan smiled, and said, "Actually, it's not difficult to beat Mo Yuan." "Oh." AI Zhongwen was stunned. Zhang Yan smiled confidently and said, "It's not that I'm boasting. I've observed Mo Yuan. Although he's quite proficient in the erosion runes, he still needs to use the bamboo chips to calculate every difficult point. In terms of calculating power, he's far inferior to me." AI Zhongwen couldn't help but nod. Putting aside everything else, Zhang Yan had never used bamboo chips to decipher erosion runes. Not only was he ashamed of his own inferiority, but which disciple of the lower house dared to say they could do the same? But this made him even more confused. Why didn't Zhang Yan go up when he clearly had the strength? Could it be that there was something he couldn't say? "Senior brother, are you wondering why I didn't go up if I had a chance of winning?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and said, "Senior brother AI, if I go up, and I don't win, I'll just be ridiculed. If I win, the other senior brothers will hate me, and I might even lose my life." AI Zhongwen was startled at first, but after thinking about it carefully, he had to admit that what Zhang Yan said made sense. All the new disciples were blocked at the foot of the mountain, and you, a nominal disciple, could win. Doesn't that mean that all the new disciples are no match for you? Although there were some discrepancies in the story, once the rumors spread, it would be a slap in the face of these people. There would be no benefits, and they would even hate him. AI Zhongwen cupped his hands, and said apologetically, "Senior brother Zhang, it's my fault for not thinking this through." He thought of Hu Xingyu's gloomy face in the side hall, and was about to remind Zhang Yan to be careful when he heard Zhang Yan's words change. "However, I am also a disciple of Qinsang School, and I can't sit back and watch as the disciples of other schools wantonly bully me." Hearing this, AI Zhongwen's spirit was lifted, and he said, "Senior brother, what do you plan to do?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and said, "Since Guangyuan School can do it, why can't we do it?" "Senior brother Zhang, you mean?" AI Zhongwen stared at Zhang Yan, and his expression was slightly agitated. At this moment, there was an indescribable thought in his heart, but when it reached his mouth, he couldn't say it. "I heard that 3 years ago, senior brother Chen Feng single-handedly stopped the disciples of 2 schools, and none of them could reach the top. I, Zhang, yearn for it, and want to imitate you. If they stop my school's disciples for a day, I will also stop them for a day." Zhang Yan straightened his back, and his eyes were fierce, and said, "Senior brother AI, do you dare to go with me?" Chapter 12. Liang Dong picked up a pen in front of the earth gate and wrote his name and the sect he came from on the sticker in front of the gate. He sneered and strode into the earth gate. Behind him were his 3 fellow disciples, who also strode into the mountain gate with their heads held high. Nanhua sect had a total of 57 people, 7 of whom were inner disciples while the rest were registered disciples and servants. Guangyuan sect also had 42 people, 5 of whom were inner disciples. When they arrived, there were nearly 100 of them riding on horses and carriages, looking very aggressive. However, they were not in a hurry to reach the top. Instead, they sent a few disciples including Liang Dong up the mountain to test the attitude of Qinsang School. If they reached the top without any problems, then the disciples of the 2 sects would not be polite and completely humiliate the sect master. If Liang Dong and the others were blocked, they would be able to detect it in advance and not panic. After Liang Dong passed through the mountain gate, he saw that both sides were unusually quiet. His gaze followed the mountain path up and it was even more empty. There was not a single person in sight. It was a strong contrast to the scene of disciples from various sects outside the mountain gate. He couldn't help but laugh. Indeed, an eye for an eye. This time, it is our Guangyuan sect's turn to humiliate Qinsang School. The humiliation we suffered 3 years ago must be repaid today. The fellow disciples behind him nodded in agreement. Liang Dong was even more pleased. He waved his sleeves and said, "Fellow disciples, follow me up the mountain. We will pave the way for Big Brother Wenjun." He thought that there was no one here to stop them, so his voice was extremely loud and spread all the way up the mountain path. At this moment, a cold voice came from a big rock not far away. "Are you the senior from Guangyuan sect?" Liang Dong was taken aback. He raised his head and saw a man sitting on top of the boulder, looking down at him from high above. He was unhappy to be looked down at like this. He snorted coldly, "Yes, who are you?" The person stood up and said in a deep voice, "I am from Qinsang School, Zhang Yan." Liang Dong unconsciously took a step back. As the person's back was facing the sun, he couldn't see the person's face clearly. He squinted his eyes and said, "What do you want?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Nothing else, I'm just inviting you to a duel." Liang Dong hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you want to fight with words or martial arts?" The literary battle was like Mo Yuan sparring in erosion runes and derivations. The martial battle was a contest of skills and techniques. After entering the essence building realm, a cultivator's arms would have the strength of 1,000 jin, they would also have the ability to fight with lions and tigers, they would also have the ability to break open stone tablets. The cultivators of the profound sect practiced the profound way, before they opened their meridians. In order to prevent their body from decaying during the long years of meditation, they would often practice some martial arts to strengthen their muscles and bones. Although the Xianwen Dharma assembly was mainly written, cultivators were not scholars. The cultivators of the upper house fought and killed each other to snatch the treasured land and immortal pills. Therefore, the Dharma assembly often had a battle technique competition. However, there were also many disciples who disdained this. The reason was that after opening their meridians, they would be able to learn superior techniques, such as beheading with flying swords and turning soil into steel. A cultivator's strength was mostly reflected in their magic weapons and flying swords. Therefore, physical skills and techniques were only a small matter. However, they were not disciples of aristocratic families. Not to mention magic weapons and flying swords, even medicinal pills and talismans could not be easily obtained. They could only rely on their own bodies. Therefore, there were still many people who valued their skills and techniques. Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "Either is fine." Liang Dong's spirit was shaken and he could not wait to continue. "Then let's have a martial battle." He was not from an aristocratic family and had almost no achievements in the erosion runes path, so how could he dare to have a literary battle? For a nominal disciple like him, if he wanted to stand out in the Dharma assembly, he could only rely on his skills and techniques to gain fame. Therefore, he did not hesitate to choose a martial battle. In this aspect, he was quite confident. In order to collect the 5 elements divine sand, he would often roam the barren mountains and great swamps, fighting with tigers and wolves. His skills might not be comparable to those of his senior martial brothers who were proficient in this aspect, but it should not be a problem for him to deal with this Yutsang sect disciple who he had never heard of before. However, when Zhang Yan jumped down from the boulder, Liang Dong's confidence was shaken. He exclaimed in his heart, "This Zhang Yan is so tall." Zhang Yan was a head taller than the average person just by standing there, but this aura was not to be underestimated. However, Liang Dong was also a quick-witted and opportunistic person. His eyes turned and, taking advantage of the fact that Zhang Yan had yet to make a move, he punched out without even saying a word, hoping to catch Zhang Yan off guard. Zhang Yan's senses were keen. When he saw his opponent's toes dip and his shoulders shrug, he knew that his opponent was about to make a move. Moreover, he had already predicted the angle of Liang Dong's punch from where he was pulling back. Without even dodging, he opened his eyes wide and let out a loud roar. Boom! His fist pierced through the air and smashed into his opponent's face first. Liang Tong hadn't expected that Zhang Yan would suddenly shout, nor that his fist would actually reach him first. His mind couldn't help but tremble, and his fist paused for a moment. With a bang, Zhang Yan's fist had already heavily smashed into the bridge of his nose, and Liang Tong fell backwards. When Liang Dong looked at him again, he was already lying on the ground with his face covered in blood, completely unconscious. Zhang Yan took out a white handkerchief and wiped the blood off his fist. His expression did not change at all as he looked up at the remaining 3 people. When they saw this, they sucked in a breath of cold air and hesitated to step forward. However, they were unwilling to retreat just like that, so they couldn't help but freeze there. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "All of you can come at me together." The few Guangyuan sect disciples looked at each other and nodded their heads. Fighting as a group was also within the scope of martial arts duels as long as the competing party agreed. 3 years ago, when Chen Feng fought against a group of people, if he wasn't willing, no one would put down their pride to gang up on him. The 3 of them exchanged a few words and came up with a plan. They split into 3 directions, left, center and right, and Zhang Yan slowly closed in. Zhang Yan stood there motionlessly, only looking at the person in front of him, as if he didn't care about the people on the sides. The person in front of him saw the momentum of Zhang Yan's punch and didn't dare to be careless. According to the plan they had discussed beforehand, he suddenly took a step forward and raised his fist. His plan was to attract Zhang Yan's attention and create an opportunity for his companions on the sides. Who knew that the moment he moved, Zhang Yan also moved at the same time, taking a step forward and throwing a punch towards his face. This person was already prepared and tried to block, but he didn't expect to be blocked. Zhang Yan's punch was heavy and powerful, and when he threw the punch, all the strength in his body was concentrated on a single point. He couldn't block it at all, and his arms couldn't help but lose strength. He could only watch as Zhang Yan's fist grew bigger in front of his eyes, and then he heard a muffled sound in his ears. Teeth and blood flew out of his mouth, and his whole body was sent flying. At this time, the people on the left and right hadn't come over yet when they saw Zhang Yan take down the person in front of them. Their momentum couldn't help but be taken away. Zhang Yan had already used the momentum to turn around, and with a step, he turned from facing two people to facing one person. The person on the left didn't even have time to react before he was hit on the neck by a palm. He staggered a few steps, and with a putong sound, he fell to the ground and fainted. The last person saw that the situation wasn't looking good, and immediately said, "I admit defeat." Zhang Yan calmly cupped his hands. That person breathed a sigh of relief, and hurriedly called over a few Taoist children to carry away his fellow apprentices lying on the ground. Although the injured people looked terrible with blood all over their faces, but Zhang Yan had a sense of propriety, and these cultivators were also very tough. Including Liang Dong, they were only injured but not dead. It was just that they couldn't fight for a short period of time. Zhang Yan shook his head. In his view, these people's skills were terrible, and they had a body full of strength, but they didn't know how to use it. In his previous life, because of the lack of guns and ammunition, he could only use simple weapons to fight with mutated beasts, and people couldn't trust each other. Every day there were people dying on the street for a little bit of food and water. Living in that kind of world, you had to be careful even when you were sleeping to see if someone was trying to kill you. As a member of the upper class of the survivor camp, all his fighting skills were learned through real killing, and he was extremely particular about efficiency. There were no tricks or unnecessary movements, and he only used simple moves to finish the fight in the shortest time possible. This was the first time he fought after coming to this world, and he felt comfortable all over, and his long-dormant fighting spirit was awakened. At this time, Ai Zhongwen walked out of the mountain gate, and he couldn't help but look at Zhang Yan a few more times, and praised, "I didn't expect senior brother Zhang to also be good at fighting, looks like I was worrying too much." Zhang Yan shook his head, and said, "Fighting is a small matter, the flying swords of our Xian men are the real killing weapons." Ai Zhongwen nodded, and then he reminded, "Guang Yuan's sect is good at talisman books and incantations, I'm afraid they came prepared this time, senior brother Zhang must be careful." Guang Yuan's sect's talisman books were very magical, and could suddenly increase a person's fighting power by several times. However, it was not easy to make talismans, and using it on a lower house disciple would be a waste. But after the last spell gathering, they might not do the same this time. Zhang Yan smiled, and said, "No worries, we'll deal with it when it comes. Besides, there's still senior brother to fill in the gaps, what's there to be afraid of?" Although Ai Zhongwen came from an aristocratic family, he always had a heroic spirit, or else he wouldn't have been so excited by Zhang Yan's words, and come together to stop the disciples of the two sections. After hearing this, he was also excited, and immediately nodded in agreement. Of course, rather than saying that he believed in Zhang Yan, it would be better to say that he believed in Zhang Yan's background, so he inexplicably had great confidence in Zhang Yan. But he didn't know that the reason why Zhang Yan chose to stop the disciples of the two sects was definitely not for the glory of the sect, nor was it because of a moment of bravery. He had never been so kind, and he had other plans in mind. After understanding Chen Feng's experience at the spell gathering 3 years ago, and knowing that Chen Feng's cultivation level was not much different from his own, he suspected that Chen Feng was using it to train his vitality, so he repeatedly asked Ai Zhongwen about Chen Feng's actions that day, not letting go of even the smallest details. Ai Zhongwen thought that Zhang Yan admired Chen Feng's demeanor, so he patiently told him everything he knew in detail. After listening to him, Zhang Yan had a deeper understanding of Chen Feng's actions. Looking at what Chen Feng did at the heavenly gate of Nanhua sect, he first did not sleep or rest for the first 7 days, and he fought non-stop. Then, he was exhausted for the next 7 days, and he almost could not hold on. After that, his vitality gradually increased, and he fought bravely. In the last 7 days, he was in high spirits, and he was many times better than before. Looking at the changes in the past month, it could only be described as mysterious. Moreover, Zhang Yan also noticed that Chen Feng opened his immortal meridians and went to the upper academy not long after returning to Azure Parasol Mountain, and he actually leaped over the threshold of essence entering enlightenment. Therefore, he boldly speculated that Chen Feng must have obtained great benefits in the past month, so his cultivation level rose to another level. However, Chen Feng had his own path, and it was impossible for him to copy it completely, let alone know the details. However, with the remnant of the jade in hand, he was not afraid of not being able to find the real way to train his vitality. If the first time did not work, he would try again. If the second time did not work, he would try again. If the third time did not work, he would try again. If the third time did not work, he would try again. He would eventually find the real way. While he waited here, Liang Dong was carried out of the mountain gate. Instantly, the disciples of the various sects who had been sleeping for the past few days became excited, and they felt that a good show was about to begin. Soon, this news reached the ears of the disciples of the 2 sects who were still at the foot of the mountain, and their originally aggressive momentum was immediately dampened. Chapter 13. That night, Guangyuan sect and Nanhua sect stayed at the foot of the rippling cloud peak. Although it was already late, lanterns were still lit everywhere, illuminating the surrounding houses as if it was daytime. In the main hall of the main residence, the 5 disciples of Guangyuan sect who were going to Azure Parasol Mountain to participate in the ritual were gathered together. The eldest disciple, Wen Jun, sat at the head of the table. He looked scholarly and had a long beard that reached his chest, giving him the demeanor of an elder. To his left sat the second disciple, Shen Jingyue, who was the brains of the 5. He was handsome and wore a white Taoist robe, giving off an otherworldly aura. To Wen Jun's right sat the third disciple, Zhang Zhen, and the fourth disciple, Jiang Yu. Qi Xian, who was ranked last among the 5, was pacing back and forth in the main hall. He was burning with anger as he pointed at the 2 disciples who were injured by Zhang Yan and cursed, "Didn't you guys always boast about your skills and dare to fight Chen Feng? Why are you guys so cowardly today?" The 2 disciples were extremely ashamed. However, they were too heavily injured to speak, and the only uninjured disciple was locked up because he was afraid of fighting. Shen Jingyue smiled and comforted, "Junior Qi, don't worry. I've already sent someone to investigate. It won't be too late to make a decision after we find out the truth." Shen Jingyue's father was one of the 5 elders of Guangyuan sect. Qi Xian was very respectful of him, so he didn't dare to say anything after hearing this. He waved his hand and had the servants take the 2 disciples away while he retreated to the side and sat down. When Jun stroked his long beard and sighed, "It's a pity that although the Lin clan has agreed to our conditions, Zheng Sun is not a simple person despite his weak personality." He actually gathered all the disciples in a side hall. "It seems like it will be difficult to get accurate information now." Shen Jingyue nodded. The eldest disciple of Qinsang School is indeed worthy of his reputation. "Senior martial brother, please wait patiently. I believe there will be news soon." An hour later, the disciple who was in charge of gathering information finally returned. Reporting to senior martial brothers, "The person who blocked my way is called Zhang Yan, an in-name disciple of Qinsang sect's Good Abyss Temple. It is said that this person is quite skilled in the Tao of erosion runes." When Jun was surprised, "Zhang Yan? I've never heard of this person." He turned his head and asked his third disciple, Zhang Zhen, who was sitting next to him, "Junior martial brother Zhang, is he a member of your Zhang clan?" Zhang Zhen's body was fat, his face was round, and his skin was dark. When he heard Wen Jun's question, he forced himself to get up and replied, "I know all 3 of the Zhang clan's famous books. There is no such person in the younger generation." Wen Jun said in a low voice, "Many of Qinsang School's inner disciples are missing, but they sent an in-name disciple to stand up for them. What is the meaning of this?" Shen Jinghua smiled faintly and said, "It's not surprising. It's a plan to attack my superior steed with the inferior steed and use the superior steed to attack my inferior steed." Wen Jun nodded his head in agreement, and the other three also spoke up. Junior apprentice brother Shen's words make sense. Shen Jinghua glanced to the side and saw that the disciple who inquired about the news seemed to want to say something but was hesitant, so she said, "Is there anything else you haven't reported?" The disciple hesitated for a moment, then said, "I heard on the mountain that Zhang Yan is not only good at deciphering erosion glyphs, but he also doesn't need to use bamboo chips to make deductions." "I don't know if it's true or not." Shen Jinghua listened thoughtfully, then turned to a beautiful and enchanting woman beside him and asked, "Junior Marshal Sister Jiang, what do you think?" "Jiang Yu said lightly, "It's just a false rumor. It's just a bluff." Qi Xian was even more disdainful and sneered, "If he had such means, he could have defeated Junior Marshal Brother Mo long ago. Why would he need to spend so much effort?" "Senior Marshal Sister Jiang is right, this person is most likely exaggerating." Shen Jinghua's expression became serious, "Not necessarily. This person is proficient in erosion glyphs and is not from a noble family. He might be a new disciple of one of the three Shou temple heads of the lower house. To be favored by the master, he must have an outstanding aptitude. Although no one in Qinsang School can beat Junior Marshal Brother Mo at the moment, I believe that even if he is not as good as Junior Marshal Brother Mo, he is not far off. You must not underestimate him." Qi Xian said without hesitation, "Why don't we call Junior Marshal Brother Mo?" Shen Jinghua resolutely vetoed the idea, saying, "No, the Yutsang sect is planning to do so. Once Junior Marshal Brother Mo leaves, no one will stop him on the Heaven's Gate path. He will definitely reach the summit before me." Seeing Jiang Yu's dissatisfied look, Qi Xian suddenly felt ashamed, knowing that he had made a stupid move. At this moment, footsteps sounded outside the door. The five people looked up and saw two servants supporting the injured Liang Dong up, but his expression was slightly uneasy. Shen Jinghua stood up from his seat and stopped Liang Dong from bowing. He said slowly, "Junior Marshal Brother Liang Dong, don't be hasty. I will only ask you two questions. How strong is that Zhang Yan you challenged in the Tao of martial arts?" Liang Dong thought for a moment, then said, "Senior Marshal Brother Shen, according to my observation, Zhang Yan is only powerful in his moves, but he is not strong enough. If someone can block his first three moves, they will definitely be able to defeat him." Shen Jinghua nodded, then asked, "Did Zhang Yan have anyone to help him?" Liang Dong shook his head, "I didn't see anyone." "Good. Junior Marshal Brother, go and rest well. Don't worry about this setback." Shen Jinghua comforted him a few more times, then waved his hand and sent the anxious Liang Dong away. He paced back and forth in the hall. Everyone knew that he was planning a countermeasure, so no one dared to disturb him. After a while, he stopped and looked up, saying, "Zhang Yan is obviously good at deciphering eroding glyphs, but he used his skills to defeat me. It is clear that he wants to fight with us. We cannot let him do as he wishes." He turned his head and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Qi, the Southern Flower sect is pressing us. Arrange for Junior Marshal Brother Wang to go up the mountain and challenge him. We must defeat him tonight." Qi Xian's face was filled with excitement. He said loudly, "Yes, Senior Marshal Brother, I will arrange it now." He ran out excitedly. Zhang Zhen and Jiang Yu looked at each other, then stood up and left. After the three of them left, Wen Jun suddenly sighed. His face was no longer as calm and confident as before. He said with melancholy, "I wonder if offending the Yingzang sect is the right thing to do." Shen Jinghua smiled bitterly, "My Guangyuan sect is originally a small sect. Today, we are useful, so the Southern Flower sect will use us as pawns. If we are useless, then we will be discarded like old shoes. The Southern Flower sect has just sent a message, ordering us to defeat this person within 2 days and ascend to the Rippling Cloud Peak. Our sect is in danger of being destroyed, and we urgently need the protection of the Southern Flower sect. Even though the Yingzang sect is powerful, we can't care so much at this moment." Wen Jun's face was also filled with sadness. he knew why Shen Jingyue said this. Guan Yuan's sect was originally a small sect, and it had always depended on the Southern Flower sect to survive. The highest cultivation level in the upper house was only 2 core transformation elders. This time, Guan Yuan's sect fought for the Radiant Brilliance Shell Lake, and their disciples suffered heavy casualties. Just last month, 12 Clear Chi stage disciples and 3 Mystic Light stage disciples died. Even though they managed to seize the shell field, the whole sect could be said to have suffered a great loss. If it wasn't for the fact that they had a good relationship with an elder of the Southern Flower sect, they would have long been annexed by other sections. It was also because of this reason that they had no choice but to be the vanguard of the Southern Flower sect. Shen Jingyue let out a long sigh and said, "Ever since Chen Feng defeated our 2 sect's disciples at the Southern Flower sect 3 years ago, not a single aristocratic family disciple was willing to join our sect." The Southern Flower sect has 3 traveling immortals, the 7 sweeping cloud disciples, and the 16 idle guests. The Qinsang school is even known as the 28 true masters. It's laughable that our Guan Yuan sect only has 5 disciples, and they are all here today. At this point, he coughed a few times, and his originally rosy face turned pale. When June looked at him worriedly and said, "Junior Shen, you haven't recovered for long, don't tire yourself too much." Shen Jingyue, however, ignored him and continued, "Junior apprentice brother Mo is a prodigy rarely seen in 100 years in our sect, but for the sake of our sect's honor, this time you risked your life alone and obstructed the disciples of Yutsang sect on the Heaven's Gate Road. It may seem glorious, but in reality, there is a hidden danger, but..." He suddenly stepped forward and grabbed Wen Jun's wrist, saying, "No matter how strong Yutsang sect is, we can only fight with all our might, so that Nanhua sect will not easily abandon us." Wen Jun slowly nodded, and his eyes revealed a solemn expression. Cho Shi, the mountain gate of the sweeping cloud peak. Zhang Yan, who was meditating on the mountain rock, suddenly opened his eyes. He saw a person walking towards the Earth's Gate Road. When he reached the mountain rock, the person cupped his fists and said, "Are you Senior Zhang of the Yingcang sect? I am Wang Lai, a disciple of the Guan Yuan sect. I wish to ascend the peak, and have come to ask for advice from Senior Zhang." Zhang Yan took a look and found that this person's breath was condensed, and his entire body seemed to be one. His expression was calm, and he stood there with his own bearing. With one look, he knew that this person was not an ordinary person. He jumped down from the mountain rock, cupped his fists and said, "Please." The sound here also startled Ai Zhongwen, who was meditating in the side hall beside the mountain road. He quickly got up and walked out of the hall. After taking a look at this Wang Lai, his expression couldn't help but change, as if he thought of something. However, before he could say anything to remind him, that person had already made a move on Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan only saw a figure flash in front of him, and Wang Lai's seemingly sturdy body had already approached him. In an instant, a copious amount of power came over, and actually made his breathing stagnate. He heavily spat out a mouthful of impure air, and also threw out a punch. With 2 peng-peng sounds, both of them hit each other's chest, and both of them took a step back at the same time. They couldn't help but look at each other. Wang Lai revealed a slightly surprised expression. Just now, it was clearly him who made the first move, but Zhang Yan was actually able to hit him first and use the force to retreat, causing his punch to be in vain. This kind of eyesight and control of strength was simply not like a cultivator who focused on cultivating qi and essence. Zhang Yan's eyes also revealed a dignified expression, because just now, he felt a different kind of aura. The opponent's yuan qi was actually surging like the sea, and just a punch was enough to make half of his body go numb. Fortunately, he discovered it in advance and decisively changed his attack to a push, or else he would have been injured immediately. At this time, Ai Zhongwen, who was not far away, said, "Senior Zhang, be careful, this Senior Wang is a cauldron warrior." Oh. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he glanced up and down at the opponent. This is a cauldron warrior. Chapter 14. Cauldron carrying strongman. Hearing these words, Wang Lai laughed loudly and said, "The cauldron-carrying strongman is cultivated using secret medicines, imbued with golden sand, melted with jade liquid, and forged with heavenly stars. Only a large sect can do this. What virtue or ability do I have? How could I have such good fortune?" Seeing the puzzled look on Ai Zhongwen's face, Wang Lai proudly tore off his clothes. Countless twisting and twisting tadpole-like golden talismans were flickering and crawling all over his back and chest. For a moment, the open space on the mountain path was shining with a golden light. Ai Zhongwen's expression changed and said in a low voice, "Golden Pattern Talisman Book." Wang Lai proudly smiled and said, "That's right, it is my Guangyuan sect's Golden Pattern Talisman Book." Ai Zhongwen looked at Zhang Yan and his lips moved. A trace of worry appeared on his face. The Golden Pattern Talisman Book was made by grinding the 5 elements divine sand and soaking it in a secret medicinal liquid. After 49 days, it was mixed with the spirit shell jade liquid, and after 49 days, it was made into golden ink. Then, a powerful immortal master would draw the Golden Palace talisman on the recipient's body. This way, the person's cultivation would be raised by at least 1 level. Because they both used the 5 elements divine sand and had similar auras, Ai Zhongwen would mistake him for a cauldron-carrying strongman. Wang Lai's gaze turned to Zhang Yan. His expression temporarily relaxed and he said, "Senior Zhang, your current cultivation is only at the condensed elemental energy stage. With the help of the talisman book, my cultivation is comparable to a Yuanqing entering enlightenment stage cultivator. My body is as hard as iron, my bones as strong as an elephant, my blood as strong as a river, and my strength is more than twice yours. You have no chance of winning against me. However, I can see that your attainments in martial arts are extraordinary. If we fight, both of us will suffer. Why don't you retreat now and I won't make things difficult for you? What do you think?" After exchanging blows earlier, Wang Lai could see that Zhang Yan was not easy to deal with. Although his strength was above Zhang Yan's, if they really fought, he might not have 100% chance of winning. Therefore, he did not want to fight to the death with Zhang Yan. It would be best if it could end peacefully. When Zhang Yan heard his words, he was startled at first, but then he burst out laughing. Wang Lai felt humiliated and said angrily, "What's so funny?" Zhang Yan stopped laughing and looked straight at Wang Lai. "The honor of the sect depends on you and me, how can we treat it as a game? Senior brother Wang actually wants to use words to scare me off. Isn't that laughable?" The corner of Wang Lai's eye twitched. He wanted to retort, but he couldn't find the right words. "Senior brother Wang, I originally thought that you were quite a character, but I just realized that you don't have any determination to win, no determination to defeat, and no determination to kill. How can you talk about victory or defeat?" Zhang Yan's voice grew louder and louder, and his voice carried an indomitable and imposing manner. "Senior brother Wang's words only aroused my desire to fight to the death in my heart. If you want to pass through this mountain gate, you'll have to do it over my dead body. In today's situation, there's no retreat, and the only way is to fight to the death. Watch my fist." After Zhang Yan finished speaking, he let out a roar and took a step forward. The stone tiles on the ground broke with a "kacha" sound. It was like a sudden clap of thunder, and with an unparalleled imposing manner, he crossed the space of a few feet in an instant and punched straight at Wang Lai. Wang Lai was ashamed and annoyed by Zhang Yan's words, and was caught off guard by his opponent's sudden attack. For a moment, he was intimidated by Zhang Yan's imposing manner, and couldn't help but panic. He was even worse off than Liang Dong. In a hurry, he didn't know whether to advance or retreat, and could only use his hands to block in front of his chest. In a flash, Zhang Yan had already dashed within inches of him. He punched out and hit Wang Lai's arm, but it was as if he had hit a thick wall. Zhang Yan's eyes sharpened. Wang Lai's strength was indeed great, and in such a hurry, he actually couldn't immediately break through. But facing such a powerful enemy, he only had one chance, and at this moment, he couldn't retreat. Blue veins popped out on his forehead, and he gathered all the inner chi in his body onto his fist. He had to succeed in one strike. Just when the inner chi around his body was empty, and his body was empty, the Dan aperture under his abdomen suddenly opened, and inner chi rushed out like a tide. His abdomen was steaming like boiling soup, and he only felt an indescribable power from all over his body wanting to be released. Zhang Yan let out another roar, and forcefully punched out. The force was so great that it actually made a sound out of thin air. Bang! Under one punch, the bones in Wang Lai's arm broke, and his chest caved in. Blood spurted from his mouth, and both his feet left the ground as he fell backwards. Zhang Yan's figure leaped up, and before Wang Lai landed on the ground, he grabbed Wang Lai's neck, and used his knee to hit Wang Lai's lower abdomen heavily to the ground. Then, he pressed Wang Lai under his body, and punched his head repeatedly. At first, Wang Lai still raised his hands to block, but then his consciousness gradually became chaotic, and he lost the ability to resist. Only the sound of the punches could be heard continuously. Because the back of Wang Lai's head was repeatedly hit, a small pit of gravel was formed on the stone road, and it could be imagined that Zhang Yan had used a lot of strength. In the end, Wang Lai was barely breathing, and Zhang Yan was still not at ease, so he dislocated the joints of his limbs, and then slowly stood up. But he found that although it was only a moment of confrontation, his back was actually drenched in sweat. This series of changes made AI Zhongwen dumbfounded. Usually, Zhang Yan was gentle and elegant, but when he suddenly attacked, he was incomparably fierce, like a ferocious beast pouncing on its prey. Even he, who was watching from the side, felt his body stiffen, and cold sweat dripped down his back. Looking at the already unconscious Wang Lai, he couldn't help but say with a trembling voice, "Senior brother, there's no need to be like this when we're exchanging pointers." Zhang Yan said disapprovingly, "Senior brother AI, you need to know that if you don't kill the tiger, you'll be harmed instead. If I don't hurt him this time, he'll definitely hurt me." In the apocalyptic world of his previous life, there were countless examples of opponents who were clearly on the verge of death, but because of a moment of carelessness, the tables were turned. How could he dare to be careless? He would rather spend more effort than give his opponent even a trace of chance. AI Zhongwen reluctantly accepted Zhang Yan's explanation, but the scene of Zhang Yan's sudden attack still made him feel a little uncomfortable. Zhang Yan looked at the blood-covered Wang Lai, who was on the verge of death, and secretly thought that he was lucky. Wang Lai's true strength was far above his, and what he said earlier about the gap between the two was not exaggerated at all. Such an opponent was indeed difficult to deal with, but Zhang Yan had a long history of killing and had a strong will. He would not panic just because his opponent was strong, but he was always looking for an opportunity. What Wang Lai said next gave him a glimpse of a flaw. He felt that this person's will was not strong, and he did not have the desire to win. Not only that, perhaps he was sent here by someone else, and his heart was afraid of battle. Zhang Yan had rich experience in fighting, and immediately used words to provoke the opponent, secretly gathering all the strength in his body to secretly prepare. As expected, after a few words, Wang Lai became restless and impatient, and his breath became impure. This subtle change was immediately captured by him, and he used this opportunity to decisively attack, taking down Wang Lai in one fell swoop. But when he defeated a strong opponent, he also gained something else. The moment he punched, he felt the dantian acupoint in his body suddenly open and close, and the overflowing yuan qi surged back and forth in his body, surging like a river, as if it was about to break out of his body. Fortunately, after he repeatedly punched, it gradually dissipated. And to his surprise, although this yuan qi had dissipated by more than half, he found that the last bit of yuan qi was purer and more condensed than before. He felt that he seemed to have found the real way to train yuan qi. After condensing yuan, the yuan qi was locked in the dantian acupoint, and was not under the control of the spirit, so it was difficult to move a bit out. Training yuan qi could be said to be extremely difficult, but just now, when he was on the verge of life and death, the dantian acupoint opened by itself. He suddenly thought that Chen Feng must have been the same back then. Maybe he already knew this method, so he repeatedly challenged the same people, intending to open the Dantian acupoint under the extreme pressure of the outside world, and then use the spirit to condense and purify the yuan qi. It seemed that the more intense the life and death battle, the more likely it was to stimulate the Dantian acupoint to open. Originally, he felt that it was very troublesome, but after experiencing it once, to him, there was no longer any secret to speak of. Ai Zhongwen walked in front of Zhang Yan, took out a bottle of pills from his sleeve, and handed it to Zhang Yan, saying, "Senior Zhang, you have fought several battles in a day, why don't you take these pills and recover as soon as possible? Who knows, there might be another fierce battle tomorrow." Zhang Yan held the pill in his hand, but did not immediately take it. Instead, he fell into deep thought. Guanyuan sect actually sent out such a powerful person in the night. This clearly meant that they did not have the intention to prolong the battle, but wanted to end it quickly. This was not a good sign for him. He could deal with one Wang Lai, but there was no guarantee that he could deal with 2 or 3. Back when Chen Feng was at Nanhua sect, he did not meet any particularly powerful opponents, but this did not mean that he could not meet any. This made him involuntarily want to retreat. After all, it was too risky to obstruct the disciples of the 2 sects at the mountain gate. Now that he had found the right path, and with the remnant jade in his hand, he was confident that even if he did not engage in a life and death battle, he could still refine his yuan qi. He could definitely find another suitable method, so there was no need for him to stay here and fight to the death with the disciples of the 2 sections. However, what was the purpose of him participating in the spell assembly? Wasn't it to make a name for himself? Now that there was such a great opportunity, he could not let it go so easily. Although it was often said that one could not have his cake and eat it too, he did not want to give up on either. Thinking of this, he slightly revealed a cold smile. Since Guanyuan sect wanted to end the battle quickly, then he would comply with their wishes. "Senior AI, please send a letter of challenge. Just say that I, Zhang Yan, want to challenge Guanyuan sect. In 3 days, we will deduce the star steel." Ai Zhongwen's eyes suddenly widened. After a while, he came back to his senses. He stepped forward and grabbed onto Zhang Yan's sleeve. He hurriedly said, "Senior Zhang, are you crazy? Be careful, be careful." The star steel was originally a tablet inscription used by ancient Taoists to record the movement of the stars. All of them were written in eroded words, and there were a total of 9 of them. It was said that they contained many mysterious changes in the operation of the heavenly secrets. Ever since this tablet had been stored, people in the current world had deduced and deciphered 6 of these tablets. However, the stars were constantly changing, and there was no fixed number. Everyone's interpretation was very different. These 6 tablets were the cornerstones of the Xianwen spell assembly, and every time they were handed over to the owner for safekeeping. However, the inscriptions on these tablets were quite strange. When deducing, one's qi would slowly change according to the stars. If one could understand the trick behind it, it would naturally be very beneficial. However, if one made a mistake and went against the heavenly secrets, one's qi would be messed up, and one's meridians would be damaged. In serious cases, one's soul would be injured, and one's Tao foundation would be destroyed. Therefore, this was not a battle of Xianwen, but a battle of life and death. Zhang Yan's expression was as calm as usual. He said in a deep voice, "Senior AI, if I don't do this, should I just sit here and wait for Guanyuan sect to attack us? If that's the case, why don't we take the initiative and finish this battle in one go?" Chapter 15. That night, the heavily injured Wang Lai and a letter of challenge were sent to the disciples of Guanyuan sect. Not even 2 sentences were read before everyone started cursing and accusing Zhang Yan of being too arrogant. A mere disciple of Yuzhang sect dared to challenge an entire sect. He really didn't know what was good for him. However, when the letter of challenge was read, it caused an uproar. It was because the letter of challenge mentioned that Zhang Yan wanted to compete with the disciples of Guanyuan sect in deciphering the star steel. Everyone knew how difficult the star steel was. The star steel was used by the Xianwen Spell Club. Every time, at the end of the competition, a master would come out to evaluate the outstanding disciples and choose one person to decipher the star stele in front of everyone to show that the sect was worthy of its name. However, this was only possible with the help of the master and the protection of the talisman. Directly using deciphering the star stele to compete? There had never been such a daring person. In contrast to the reactions of the other disciples, the 5 new disciples of the Guangyuan sect treated this challenge letter with unprecedented caution. This was because they believed that this was not a decision made by Zhang Yan alone. They all believed that the entire Yucang sect was behind this. This misunderstanding also made them not dare to underestimate Zhang Yan. They originally thought that he was just a small chess piece, but now he seemed to be the trump card of Yucang sect. Instantly, they placed him at an unprecedented height. Shen Jingyue read the letter of challenge a few times and finally sneered, Yucang sect is quite smart, they didn't mention a single word about Nanhua sect. The eldest disciple, Wen Jun, was calm and composed. He stroked his long beard and said in a deep voice, those who appeared before were all disciples of my Guangyuan sect. They naturally wouldn't take the initiative to provoke Nanhua sect. However, with this, my Guangyuan sect has no way out. Yucang sect saw through our intention to fight quickly and forced us to accept the challenge. As long as the news of this challenge spread, Guangyuan sect was destined to be in a difficult position. As for Nanhua sect, their original plan was to let Guangyuan sect charge at the front. They weren't willing to easily fall out with Yucang sect, so they definitely wouldn't jump out at this time. If I don't accept the challenge, then everything I've done before will be for naught. Shen Jingyue threw the letter of challenge to the side, and a faint sneer appeared on the corner of her mouth. One person challenging my Guangyuan sect, what a big tone. Deducing the star stele is never about the number of people, but this Zhang Yan actually picked up this reputation for nothing. When Jun shook his head and said, since the Yucang sect dares to send out Zhang Yan, it seems that this person has some ability as junior brother predicted. I'm afraid it won't be easy to win. Meanwhile, the third disciple, Zhang Zhen, who'd been standing silently at the side all along, suddenly stood up and cupped his hands as he said, Senior brothers, why don't you allow little brother to try in the first round? Shen Jingyue looked at Zhang Zhen in surprise, then slowly said, in our sect, although junior brother Zhang's calculation ability isn't as good as junior brother Mo's, it's still quite rare. However, the star stele is filled with hidden dangers, and it's not normal. It's better for senior brother to bear it alone. Junior brother, you shouldn't go. However, Zhang Zhen insisted and said, I'm just a concubine from the Fengyan Zhang clan. Ever since I entered the sect, the 2 senior brothers have taken care of me a lot, and I'm unable to repay them. Now that junior brother Mo is able to raise the prestige of our sect in the Sky Gate sect, as your senior brother, how can I be inferior? Shen Jingyue tactfully persuaded a few more times, but no matter what he said, this usually honest and simple junior brother refused to give in no matter what. In the end, Shen Jingyue could only agree. Zhang Zhen finally revealed a silly smile and said, Senior brother, don't worry. I've also studied the star stele in the previous spell gathering. With my calculation ability, deducing half of the star stele shouldn't be a problem. If Zhang Yan is indeed powerful, it's not too late to withdraw when the time comes. When Jun pondered for a while, then nodded and said, if that's the case, I'll also go. You can't. Shen Jingyue was shocked. He quickly dissuaded, eldest senior brother, just stay here, I'll go with junior brother Zhang. When Jun was the eldest disciple of Guangyuan sect's lower house, and he was also the benchmark of the lower house. He couldn't easily participate in the battle. Once he lost, the loss of his reputation wouldn't just be limited to him alone. When Jun sighed and said, how can I not understand the logic behind this, senior brother? But if you're the only one participating in the battle, the Southern Flower sect might mistakenly think that our Guangyuan sect didn't use our full strength. You need to know that honor and disgrace is a small matter, survival is a big matter. Shen Jingyue was shocked when he heard this. He was silent for a while, then finally stood up and respectfully bowed to Wen Jun. He solemnly said, Senior brother, you're right. I've been negligent. When June quickly helped him up and said, "We're all disciples of the sect, there's no need to be like this. If that's the case, junior brother Zhang will go first, and I will go second. If I can't win, I'll ask senior brother to go third." Shen Jingyue thought about it carefully and felt that this was the most suitable arrangement. At least the Southern Flower sect wouldn't think that Guangyuan sect didn't put in enough effort. In the end, he worriedly reminded Zhang Zhen, "Junior brother Zhang, don't be greedy for battle." Zhang Zhen's chubby face squeezed out a smile and said, "Don't worry, senior brother. I know my limits." He knew that his achievements in erosion runes weren't high, but he was determined to tire out Zhang Yan's mind so that he could prepare for Shen Jingyue's next battle. On the drifting cloud peak, the news of Zhang Yan challenging Guangyuan sect to a battle had also reached the ears of the 28 disciples of the Yingcang sect. Although there were many different opinions, the reaction was not as intense as that of the Guangyuan sect. This was because Zhang Yan was only a disciple in name, and he was challenging Guangyuan sect in his own name. Winning or losing had nothing to do with them, so they were naturally happy to watch from the sidelines. However, there was one thing that was surprisingly consistent: no one was optimistic about Zhang Yan's chances. In order to decipher the star steels, one would naturally have to bring the star steels down from the peak. However, since it wouldn't hurt him at all, and he could also use this opportunity to suppress the overbearing Guangyuan sect, Zheng Sun was also happy to open the door. He ordered people to bring the 6 star steels down from the peak, and temporarily built a 30-meter-wide platform at the foot of the drifting cloud peak. The 6 star steels were lined up on the platform, so that the disciples of the various sects could clearly see them. As soon as the news spread, it immediately caused a stir in the entire Azure Parasol Mountain. Not only the disciples of the various sects, but even the disciples who weren't qualified to participate in the Dharma assembly in the past came one after another. They all wanted to see who was so bold as to challenge a sect to a duel. In less than 2 days, no less than 1,000 cultivators had gathered at the foot of the drifting cloud peak. For a moment, the disciples of the various sects were inquiring about Zhang Yan. Even before the duel officially started, his reputation could be said to be known by everyone. 3 days passed by in a hurry. At the foot of the drifting cloud peak, on the high platform, the 6 star steels in front of the array were emitting a faint black light under the scorching sun. Because of their age, the edges of the star steels were incomplete, but it somehow added a sense of simplicity and heaviness to them. Every star steel was engraved with densely packed etchings. There were at least 10,000 words, and just a glance at them would make people feel dizzy. In the middle of the platform, Ai Zhongwen had arranged a table and a praying mat. On top of it, there was a writing brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. There were also 5 other tables scattered in a ring shape, so it was obvious who was the host and who was the guest. Under the gazes of thousands of people, Zhang Yan's expression was calm. He ignored the many complicated gazes of disdain, contempt, rebuke, worship, and so on. He calmly walked all the way up the high platform. Just this calm composure was admirable. No one knew that he wasn't worried about the arranged duel. Instead, he was thinking that after today, he would naturally become famous among the various sections. As long as there were no accidents, one of the 3 Shou generation gurus would definitely accept him as an inner disciple. Once he became an inner disciple, the door to the Great Way would already be half open to him, and he would be one step closer to becoming an immortal. Thinking of this, his eyes revealed a resolute expression. "Your Excellency is junior apprentice brother Zhang Yan? I am Shen Jingyue. I have long heard of senior apprentice brother Zhang's name." Shen Jingyue walked up the platform half a step behind Zhang Yan. He cupped his hands towards Zhang Yan. On the surface, his expression was calm, but in reality, he was secretly observing Zhang Yan's behavior. He saw that Zhang Yan's appearance and demeanor were both excellent, and his expression was calm and steady. It was obvious that he was very confident about this duel. Zhang Yan cupped his hands in return and said, "I don't dare." Zhang Yan is just a junior. Although Guangyuan sect was a small sect, Shen Jingyue was still an inner disciple. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he had to at least put on a humble and courteous posture. Shen Jingyue didn't comment on Zhang Yan's humble words. He smiled indifferently and said, "Junior apprentice brother Zhang, the first duel will be between you and my junior apprentice brother Zhang Zhen. However, before the duel, are you willing to listen to what I have to say? Senior apprentice brother, please speak." Shen Jingyue took a step forward and looked at Zhang Yan with a burning gaze. He said softly, "Junior apprentice brother Zhang, in this duel, if you win, then there is no need to talk about anything else. If I win, how about you join my Guangyuan sect?" What? Zhang Yan was shocked. He originally thought that Shen Jingyue would only try to persuade him to withdraw from the duel, or at least threaten him. He didn't think that Shen Jingyue would suddenly bring up this topic. Shen Jingyue looked at Zhang Yan's expression. Seeing that he didn't show any signs of disgust, he immediately made a decision in his heart and continued, "Junior apprentice brother Zhang, you are only a disciple in name. My father is an upper elder of Guangyuan sect. If you are willing to join my sect, you will immediately become an inner disciple. Dao books, medicinal pills, you can choose whatever you want. If you open your immortal meridian, I can persuade my father to accept you as a direct disciple. What do you think?" Shen Jingyue's attitude was sincere, and the conditions were quite generous. It was impossible to say that Zhang Yan wasn't moved. Although Guangyuan sect was a small sect now, it used to be a large sect in the East Hua continent. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Also, there was an advantage, there were very few inner disciples. This also meant that the competition within the sect wasn't as fierce as in large sections. This was indeed the case. Because there weren't many disciples, Guangyuan sect had always been united against outsiders. There was also a rare harmony between the disciples within the sect. However, Zhang Yan had other concerns. First, although Shen Jingyue made a solemn vow and promised many benefits, who knew if this wasn't a plan to shake his resolve? Therefore, he didn't dare to believe it. Second, he didn't think that Guangyuan sect's future was good. Although Nanhua and Guangyuan sects were on good terms, Guangyuan sect had always been attached to Nanhua sect. Now that Guangyuan sect took the initiative to challenge Yucang sect, Nanhua sect still hadn't said a word. It was enough to show that Guangyuan sect couldn't make its own decisions and might even be abandoned at any time. This kind of sect didn't give him any sense of security. Third, Yucang sect was, after all, a large sect in the East Hua continent. With him here, the Zhou clan wouldn't dare to use force. However, if he switched to Guangyuan sect, then things would be different. Therefore, regardless of whether Shen Jingyue was sincere or not, he wouldn't agree. Therefore, he rejected it without hesitation. Shen Jingyue sighed. Obviously, he felt pity for Zhang Yan's choice. His words of trying to recruit Zhang Yan were sincere. The reason was that after the arranged battle, Zheng Sun and the others weren't in a hurry to defeat the prodigy Mo Yuan. The disciples were no longer sitting in the side hall, so news came down from the mountain. He knew that Zhang Yan was standing up for the sect alone and didn't have anyone supporting him from behind. He was impressed by Zhang Yan's spirit and ability, and he saw that Zhang Yan was an outstanding person. Instantly, he wanted to cherish this talent. Guangyuan sect was in urgent need of new blood, so they didn't care much about the background of their disciples. Therefore, he sent an invitation to Zhang Yan on the spot. However, Zhang Yan didn't think much of Guangyuan sect. Instead, he wanted to use them to step onto the Great Path Heavenly Gate. Therefore, he took a step back, put his hands behind his back, and said in a low voice, "There's no point in talking anymore. Senior Shen, please come up to the stage. Our two sects will decide the winner today." Chapter 16. Zhang Yan didn't leave any leeway in his words, so Shen Jingyue couldn't continue. However, he wasn't angry. He smiled faintly and said, "Junior Zhang, you're on your own." He turned around and left the stage. Not long after, the chubby Zhang Zhen slowly walked up to the stage. However, he wasn't good with words, so after bowing politely, he and Zhang Yan took their respective seats. Zhang Zhen looked at the first star stele. The first star stele was divided into 9 sections and 3 chapters, with more than 10,000 words. He had secretly glanced at it a few times during the spell gathering. Now that he looked at it again, he realized that the words looked like ants crawling on them. After a few glances, he felt a sense of nausea. He hurriedly took a few deep breaths and tried to calm his mind. He took out a set of bamboo chips from his sleeves and prepared to decipher it. He inadvertently glanced at Zhang Yan and couldn't help but be startled. He saw that Zhang Yan was already writing at a rapid speed on the table. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. What was he doing? Not only was he puzzled, but the disciples sitting below the stage, including Shen Jingyue, were also puzzled. They didn't know what Zhang Yan was trying to do. No one would believe that Zhang Yan had already started deciphering the eroded text. Not only did he not use the bamboo chips, but he was also writing so quickly. It didn't seem like he was deducing the eroded text, but copying it. In fact, Zhang Yan's deduction of the star stele was not much different from copying an article. This time, he challenged the Guangyuan sect alone. On the surface, he looked relaxed, as if everything was under his control, but in reality, how could he relax at all? He used all his strength right from the start, sinking his consciousness into the broken jade clone and deducing at an extremely fast speed. The broken jade had just gained something, but the content immediately flowed out from his pen. Thus, in the eyes of outsiders, Zhang Yan's actions were simply inconceivable. Zhang Zhen didn't dare to look at Zhang Yan's actions anymore after a few glances. He suddenly thought that perhaps this was Zhang Yan's strategy to mess with his mind. Thus, he decided not to pay attention to it anymore. After calming his mind and adjusting his breathing, he began to calculate according to the Guangyuan sect's calculation method. At this moment, Zhang Yan had no time to pay attention to this side. After writing the first sentence, the qi in his body inexplicably moved, and then it flowed through his limbs and bones. This kind of feeling was very strange, as if he had become one with the heavens. His body reflected the circulation of the stars, and the universe changed. Zhang Yan's expression became serious, and he became even more careful. However, it wasn't long before his reverence towards the star stele decreased greatly. He was freed from his original state of fear and trepidation, and a feeling of, "it's nothing special," arose in his heart. This wasn't because Zhang Yan was arrogant and conceited, but because after this deduction, he had already glimpsed some of the profundities within. When deducing the star stele, the qi would circulate and change along with one's interpretation of the star stele. Once one's inner qi moved, it would be extremely difficult for one to control it. However, there was a difficulty here. If one's qi had already flowed through the previous step, but the corresponding next step was not deduced in time, then the qi would be at a loss and fall into disorder. This was like a galloping horse that was being driven forward at a high speed, and one had to constantly pave the way for it. Moreover, one could not stop at will. This was extremely dangerous for those who didn't have a high level of attainment in the star stele, but for those who could decipher the star stele quickly, it was not a problem. However, this was exactly what Zhang Yan was good at. Moreover, with the remnant of the jade, it was almost impossible for him to miscalculate, and his deduction time was more than 10 times that of an ordinary person. Even when there were difficulties, he would leap over them without any hesitation. Under these circumstances, he could relax his mind and experience the wonderful feeling brought about by the circulation of qi. As he gradually familiarized himself with the circulation of the qi, he also slowly gained his own understanding. It was said that the inscriptions on the star stele corresponded to the orbit of the stars, but in his opinion, this was not the case. In his interpretation, there were a few star steles that repeatedly appeared, and every time they appeared, the circulation of the qi would repeat itself. According to this, it seemed that as long as he visualized and read these specific star steles, he would be able to drive the qi to move on its own. Just as he was thinking about this, a few of the star stele's densely packed star stele gradually lit up in his eyes. He suddenly understood something. This was not the orbit of the stars, it was clearly a narrative used by the ancient moral scholars to explain the connection between the star steel and the way of heaven. Didn't this mean that the legends were true, that a person could climb the way of heaven and ascend the gate of heaven as long as he studied the star steel thoroughly? With this thought in mind, Zhang Yan became even more focused. He wholeheartedly memorized the qi that corresponded with the star steel, preparing to study it in depth when he had the time. About 2 hours later, he had finished reading the first chapter of the star steel, which was about 3,000 words long. The surging qi in his body suddenly stopped and automatically returned to his dantian. It was obvious that one cycle had ended, and if he moved again, it would be the beginning of another cycle. At this point, Zhang Yan still wanted to continue. Only then did he remember that his opponent, Zhang Zhen, was Zhang Zhen. When he looked up, he found that his opponent's face was pale and his breathing was rapid. His fat body was trembling non-stop, and his grip on the bamboo chips was unstable, as if they could fall at any time. It was obvious that he was trapped in the star steel, unable to extricate himself. However, what surprised Zhang Yan was that although this fat young cultivator seemed to be on the verge of collapse, he did not actually collapse. Instead, he persisted and passed the first stage. Zhang Zhen stood up, panting heavily. He raised his sleeve and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He wanted to exchange the star steel with Zhang Yan, but he found that the first part of the star steel had been soaked in his own sweat, and the words had become blurred and indistinct. He could not help but feel embarrassed. Zhang Yan, however, did not mind. He smiled and took the star steel, then handed his own star steel to his opponent. Zhang Zhen took a closer look and found that whether it was in terms of comprehension of the star steel or the calmness that flowed between the lines, Zhang Zhen could not compare to him. The outcome of the battle was obvious. Moreover, he was shocked that Zhang Yan could decipher the star steel without using the bamboo chips. This point convinced him of his loss. He bowed to Zhang Yan in admiration and said, "Senior brother is truly talented. I am ashamed of my inferiority." At the end of his speech, Zhang Zhen felt that he did not have the face to stay on the stage any longer. He staggered down from the stage, but after a few steps, he staggered and almost fell. Qi Xian rushed over to support him and said, "Senior brother, be careful." Zhang Zhen struggled to stand up. When he raised his head, he saw Wen Jun and Shen Jingyue looking at him with concern. He apologized, "Senior brother, I have failed you too. I am ashamed." Wen Jun comforted him, "Junior brother, you have done nothing wrong. You only need to rest and recuperate. In the next round, let me see just how good this Zhang Yan is." Shen Jingyue was shocked when he heard this. This was not the arrangement they had agreed on. He was just about to speak when Wen Jun interrupted him. Junior brother Zhang originally planned to exhaust Zhang Yan's mental energy, but I see that he is still full of energy. It is obvious that he still has energy to spare. You may not be his match if you go up now. It won't be too late for you to go up after I've fought. Shen Jingyue still wanted to say something, but when Jun's face darkened and he said, "I have already made up my mind." "It's settled then." He gave Qi Xian a look, and the latter understood and came forward to stop Shen Jingyue. Shen Jingyue had never seen Wen Jun use his status as the head disciple to suppress him. He could not think of a solution and could only watch helplessly as Wen Jun went up the stage. However, his eyes gradually revealed a trace of determination. "Junior brother Zhang, Guang Yuan Wen Jun greets you." Wen Jun had long since entered the profound gate. He wore a black Taoist robe and a 5-rimmed crown on his head. He stood tall and straight with a beautiful beard. He had the bearing of a head disciple of the lower house. Zhang Yan solemnly returned the greeting and said, "Please." The second chapter of the Star Steel was even more difficult to decipher than the previous one. Wen Jun's mastery of the eroding runes was not as good as Zhang Zhen's, but he had already reached the stage of Yuan Qing entering truth. It was just that he had not yet opened his meridians. The Yuan Qi in his body was full and condensed, and it would not be easily triggered by the Qi. Even if his qi moved independently, he relied on his profound cultivation to suppress it. This was also the method that ordinary disciples used to derive the eroding runes. Although they could not increase their speed in deciphering the eroding runes, they could suppress the qi movement so that it would not escape their control. Although this was more strenuous and did not bring them any benefits, it was still a good method to use in a battle. Therefore, in a battle of deduction, if both sides' understanding of the eroding runes was similar, then it would be a battle of cultivation. This was also the reason why so many disciples did not think highly of Zhang Yan. Unfortunately, he had a divine tool in his hands and could not be judged by common sense. After Wen Jun sat down to deduce, he appeared calm and composed, showing the demeanor of a head disciple. However, Zhang Yan did not pay any attention to him and continued to lift his brush. The disciples below the stage had already noticed that Zhang Yan did not need to rely on bamboo sticks to deduce the eroding runes. Now that they saw him again, they were amazed. Moreover, Zhang Yan's brush was like flowing water, moving clouds and floating clouds. He was able to slow down in a rush, and he had a good balance. His appearance and demeanor were both excellent, giving off a wonderful feeling of comfort. This caused the audience to be even more amazed. However, at this moment, more people were looking at Wen Jun. They did not know if this head disciple of the Guangyuan sect would be able to defeat Zhang Yan in this battle. Unknowingly, the audience had already placed Zhang Yan in a strong position in their hearts. They no longer looked down on him just because he was a mere head disciple. Another 2 hours passed by in a hurry. Wen Jun's head was also faintly covered in sweat, but he was much stronger than Zhang Zhen from before. He still sat upright on the stage, and the hand that held the brush in his hand was firm and steady as he smoothly finished reading the second chapter. At this time, he also realized that his ability had reached its limit. He did not dare to advance rashly anymore. He sighed slightly and put down the brush in his hand. When he raised his head, he found that Zhang Yan had already finished deciphering the second chapter. The ink on the paper had already dried a long time ago. He shook his head, stood up and said, "This round, Junior Zhang has won." This extremely graceful and self-restrained head disciple of the Guangyuan sect also made Zhang Yan feel a sense of respect. He solemnly cupped his hands and watched Wen Jun leave the stage. The scene was completely opposite of what the disciples had expected. It was not that Zhang Yan had overestimated himself and left in a sorry state. Instead, it was that he had easily won 2 rounds in a row and left Guangyuan's sect with a smile. They could not help but wonder. Below the stage, Shen Jingyue's expression was solemn. He thought to himself, "It seems that I have underestimated this person." Thinking of this, he could not help but feel regret. With Zhang Yan's ability, it was no wonder that he was unwilling to join the Guangyuan sect. At the same time, he could not help but wonder, could it be that the information from the Lin clan was false? Could it be that Zhang Yan was a head disciple in name, but was actually a head disciple secretly cultivated by the Yingcang sect? Chapter 17. Before Shen Jingyue stepped onto the stage, he quietly took out a bottle of pills from his sleeve and swallowed it while his fellow disciples weren't paying attention. This bottle of pills was called Gathering Life Powder. It could stimulate one's brain power for a short period of time and increase one's calculation ability to the maximum. However, this pill was no less harmful to the body than a tiger or wolf's poison. It was the same as overdrawing one's profound qi to stimulate one's potential. Even if nothing happened in the future, one's lifespan would be greatly shortened. However, the third match was too important to the Guangyuan sect. Shen Jingyue would rather sacrifice his own lifespan to fight with all his might. He tidied up his clothes and cupped his hands towards Wen Jun. "Shixiang, I'm going now." Hearing the ominous tone in Shen Jingyue's words, Wen Jun frowned imperceptibly. He comforted him, "Shitty, don't think too much. Just do your best." Shen Jingyue smiled faintly and slowly walked onto the stage. When Zhang Yan saw him again, he didn't want to say much and only cupped his hands in greeting. Shen Jingyue, however, didn't move. He looked at Zhang Yan and said in a low voice, "Shitty Zhang, I underestimated you before." After a pause, he smiled slightly and said, "However, what I said before still stands." Zhang Yan didn't respond to his words and directly said, "Shitty Shen, please." Shen Jingyue was surprised. He walked a few steps to the table and sat down. His gaze swept across the star steel. The steel, which looked like a mess to him before, was now very clear. He didn't even need to use the bamboo chips to calculate, but the result was already clear. He unhurriedly spread out the paper and began to write. Cries of surprise came from below the stage. They were already shocked when they saw Zhang Yan didn't use bamboo chips to calculate the star steel. They didn't think that Shen Jingyue was also hiding his strength. Zhang Yan frowned slightly. He had already overestimated Shen Jingyue's calculation ability, but he didn't think that this person was even more powerful than Mo Yuan. However, he had already predicted that the third match would be a bitter one, so there was no point in thinking too much. Moreover, the Guangyuan sect had undoubtedly sent out their most proficient disciple in the Tao of Erosion Runes. This meant that as long as he won this match, he would have a complete victory. He smiled faintly, lifted the hem of his robe, and sat down leisurely. He picked up the brush in his hand and looked at the third chapter on the star steel. While the two of them were fighting, 3 disciples of the Dark Azure sect's lower house were gathered together on a mountain path not far from here. Once this Zhang Yan defeats the Guangyuan sect, he will most likely become another inner disciple. This will definitely hinder our grand plan. Lin Yuan's gaze was cold as he fiercely threw out a sentence, "This person cannot be left alive." The lower house had always relied on the upper house's bestowal of elixirs, books, and the like. However, the upper house had been fighting with the 3 lake demons over the shellfish field for the past decade or so, and they were constantly attacking each other. Now, the situation was becoming more and more intense, and the bestowal was gradually decreasing every year. Originally, they were already stretched thin with 28 people. If another person were to be added, it would undoubtedly reduce their original quota. However, this was not the main point. Once Zhang Yan entered the sect, it was almost certain that he would open his meridians. In other words, even if he entered the upper house, Zhang Yan would still have to compete with them. At that time, the suppression they had over Zhang Yan would be almost non-existent. Originally, they had already formed a few small interest groups on how to distribute the cultivation resources over the past few years. Moreover, the few clans had already reached an agreement on how to distribute the cultivation resources. If another person were to be added into the group, the situation would definitely be thrown into disarray. This would inevitably cause their original arrangements to go down the drain. Lin Yuan looked at the expressions of Chen Lan and Hu Xingyu in front of him and said, "What do you 2 junior brothers think?" However, Chen Lan's face was full of disbelief. Will the master accept Zhang Yan into the sect? He was merely a disciple in name without any background. Why would the master accept him so rashly? Lin Yuan snorted and said, "Junior brother, you have also seen the aptitude of this Zhang Yan. He is not below you or me. Seeing him suppress the Guangyuan sect with his own strength, why would the master let him go?" As if to increase his persuasiveness, he continued to say, "The origin of Zhang Yan's calculation method is unknown. Previously, he did not reveal it. Perhaps he had already been chosen by the master, but he was worried about us. That was why he did not make a move until today, when he shocked the world with a single brilliant feat and established an illustrious reputation. Even if we were to open our mouths to refute him, we would not be able to say anything." Chen Lan's expression turned cold. At first, Lin Yuan's words sounded a little far-fetched. However, after thinking about it carefully, it did seem to be reasonable. It was indeed possible that Zhang Yan could be accepted by the master. Getting rid of this person was probably the safest choice. A hint of viciousness appeared on his face. If that's the case, this Zhang Yan must be killed. Good. Lin Yuan was overjoyed. He turned his head and asked Hu Xingyu, who had been silent all this while, "Senior brother Hu, what do you think?" Hu Xingyu said indifferently, "He is just a registered disciple. If I kill him, then so be it. Zhang Yan was not an inner disciple. Based on the influence of the few clans behind them, when the time comes, even if the master knew about it, he would not be able to do anything to them. Chen Lan suddenly thought of something and reminded, it's just that AI Zhongwen seems to be on good terms with Zhang Yan. He comes from the AI clan of Anfeng, which is a big problem. Hu Xinyu said coldly, no worries, leave this person to me. Since senior brother who has come forward, then it can't be any safer. Hu Xinyu had always been proud and arrogant. Since he was willing to speak, he would definitely not make a mistake. Lin Yuan was immediately relieved. He looked around again and said, if Zhang Yan loses this round, we don't have to be too extreme. We just need to find a way to drive him out of the Yingcang sect. If he wins, we need to act as soon as possible. At this moment, on the soil platform, no one had expected that this battle would be so intense. The two of them had deduced along the way and had unknowingly reached the third stele. They were all amazed, not knowing where the limits of these two people were. It should be noted that only 6 of the star steles had been deciphered, and all of them were here. At this time, even Zhang Yan felt the pressure increase. He no longer had the time to experience the changes in his aura and focused on deciphering the stone inscriptions. His consciousness seemed to be divided into 2. One was rapidly deducing and calculating in the remnant jade clone, while the other was constantly writing on the white paper in his main body. If he was in such a state, Shen Jingyue was not having it easy either. As the effects of the elixir gradually wore off, his mental strength had been severely depleted. For someone like him who forcibly stimulated his brain to increase his calculation ability, the pressure was like a heavy burden on his back. He could not relax for even a moment. Not long after, his vision blurred, and he paused at an obstacle. His chi became chaotic, and he suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood on the white paper. He did not care that he had spat out the blood, but he regretfully looked at the stained paper. At this time, he could not stop. He sat up slightly and swallowed another mouthful of blood, but he did not stop writing. After deciphering another paragraph, Zhang Yan took a moment to pay attention to Shen Jingyue. He found that his opponent's chest was dripping with blood. It was a ghastly sight, and there were strands of white hair on his temples. Seeing his appearance, Zhang Yan knew that his opponent would not be able to hold on for much longer. He shook his head and sighed. Senior brother, why do you have to risk your life? Shen Jingyue did not have time to answer. Suddenly, he felt a surge of blood in his throat. He could only feel his vision turning black. He could no longer hold it in, and with a few mouthfuls of blood, he fell to the side of the table. Junior brother. When June, who was below the stage, hurriedly rushed up to the stage. He stretched out his hand to touch his wrist, and his expression could not help but turn gloomy. Shen Jingyue's current situation was extremely bad. His aura was chaotic and had already spread to his internal organs. Furthermore, it seemed that he had taken some medicine. His heart was weak and his brain was severely exhausted. If he did not recuperate in time, not only would his foundation be destroyed, his life would also be in danger. Shen Jingyue opened his eyes slightly and struggled to hold on to Wen Jun's wrist. He said, eldest senior brother, if I die, please tell my big brother not to seek revenge on Zhang Yan. He is an outstanding talent, and if there is a chance, please take him in. He will definitely be able to strengthen our Guangyuan sect. Even now, he still had fantasies about Zhang Yan. It was not only because of the ability that Zhang Yan had displayed. Perhaps it was because he had risked his life to fight with Zhang Yan. In the end, when he was divining, he actually came into contact with a trace of the workings of the heavens. He could faintly see that Zhang Yan seemed to have another kind of luck on him. When Jun's eyes became hot, he choked and said, Junior brother. He knew that Shen Jingyue was the second son of his family. He also had an older brother, Shen Juefeng, who was a mystic light stage expert of the upper house. Shen Juefeng had a bad temper and was never easy to talk to. He did not expect that Shen Jingyue would still be thinking about the sect at this time. As the eldest disciple, he felt hatred and shame in his heart. When Jun handed Shen Jingyue to Qi Xian, who had just caught up, he himself got off the stage and stood in front of the eldest disciple of the lower house, Zheng Sun. He bowed deeply and said, "Junior brother Mo is young and ignorant. These few days have been ridiculous. I hope that senior brother will not take it to heart." There was an uproar below the stage. These words meant that the Guangyuan sect had officially admitted defeat. Zheng Sun helped Wen Jun up with a kind expression. The other party was also the eldest disciple of the sect, but he was so humble in front of Zheng Sun. If Zheng Sun continued to pester him, he would be given the reputation of being narrow-minded. Thus, Zheng Sun said gently, "Junior brother Wen, junior brother Mo is young and only likes to play around. Why would I bother with him? This matter will end here. Our sects still need to interact more in the future." The corner of Wen Jun's mouth revealed a bitter smile. They could be considered to have returned in failure in this assembly. What was disappointing was that even now, no one from the Southern Flowers sect had come out to speak up for them. He sighed inwardly and sent someone to call Mo Yuan over. Then, he quietly left with the people from the Guangyuan sect. On the other side, the figures of Lin Yuan and the other two appeared at the side of the soil stage. They called out to Zhang Yan loudly, "Zhang Yan, come over here." Upon seeing this, Ai Zhongwen rushed in front of Zhang Yan and reminded him in a low voice, "This is senior brother Lin. Be careful, junior brother." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He had naturally heard of Lin Yuan's name and knew that he was probably up to no good. He slowly walked forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Greetings, senior brother Lin." Lin Yuan sneered and said sternly, "Zhang Yan, do you know what crime you've committed?" Zhang Yan's expression did not change. He said, "I don't know what crime I've committed." Lin Yuan's face darkened. He said, "You provoked fellow Taoists for no reason and fought privately, causing a rift between our two sections. You lied to your seniors and instigated fellow Taoists to help you. You deserve to die." After hearing what he said, he thought that Zhang Yan would panic. He did not expect that Zhang Yan's expression would be calm and composed. He said indifferently, "Senior brother Lin, you obstructed the path and caused my Yingsang sect's disciples to be unable to reach the summit for 3 days. Although I am only an in-name disciple, I know the word shame. I obstructed the Guangyuan sect so that my Yingsang sect's reputation would not be ruined by other sections." Lin Yuan yelled, "Shut up. All the senior brothers have their own plans. How can we allow a junior like you to mess around? Junior brothers, let's take this man down." Ai Zhongwen was furious. He was about to open his mouth, but he did not expect his chest to feel stuffy and his body could not move. It turned out that Hu Xingyu had grabbed his wrist and a wave of Yuan Qi had instantly blocked his meridian point, causing him to be unable to open his mouth. He was shocked and angry, but he could not resist. His face immediately turned red. Zhang Yan's gaze swept across the area. A few new disciples had already surrounded him, and the mountain path had already been blocked by more than a dozen disciples. He secretly sneered and was about to make his move. At this moment, a clear and melodious sound of bells and drums sounded on the cloud-swaying peak. Everyone could not help but look towards the peak. A fair-skinned Taoist child appeared on a rock not far away. He said loudly, "Where is Zhang Yan?" Master Shi Shoujing, He Shoushuan, Zhen Shouzhong, and Good Abyss Monastery's in-name disciple Zhang Yan can enter the monastery to participate in the ceremony. Chapter 18. As soon as the Taoist child said this, everyone had different expressions on their faces, but no one made a move. Zhang Yan didn't know if this Taoist boy was real or fake, so he didn't dare to believe him. Lin Yuan and the others were doubtful. They didn't know if the 3 masters had any other arrangements other than sending this Taoist boy. They did not dare to make a move immediately. Seeing that there was no movement for a long time, the Taoist child immediately raised the horsetail whisk in his hand and shouted, "The token of the masters is here. Where is Zhang Yan?" Hurry up and come forward. As soon as the horsetail whisk appeared, everyone's expression changed. Lin Yuan's expression became even more unsightly. He could tell that it was the longevity horsetail whisk that Master Shi Shoujing always carried with him. Once this item appeared, if they still made a move, they would not be able to escape the crime of disrespecting their masters. Not only that, this horsetail whisk was a meticulously crafted instrument. If it was really used, no one present would be able to block it. The Taoist child was also nervous. Although Shi Shoujing had taught him the method of controlling instruments, with his shallow inner qi, he did not know how many times he could control it. This instrument was more of a deterrent than a practical one. Finally, after thinking about it, Lin Yuan still did not dare to challenge the dignity of the masters. He gave a look to his left and right. Chen Lan also knew that there was no way to deal with Zhang Yan today. Although she was unwilling, there was nothing she could do. She angrily waved her hand, asking everyone to step back and open up a path. The stalemate was eased. Seeing that the people surrounding him were gradually dispersing, Zhang Yan acted as if nothing had happened. However, he did not dare to relax in his heart and was secretly on guard. He walked in front of the Taoist child, cupped his fists and said, "Zhang Yan is here." "You are Zhang Yan." The Taoist child let out a sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere here almost made him breathless. He did not dare to stay here any longer. He quickly said, "Zhang Yan, quickly follow me into the temple." Watching Zhang Yan leave with the Taoist child, Lin Yuan could not help but feel a little regretful. Originally, he wanted to use words to control Zhang Yan. If Zhang Yan didn't dare to resist, then he would let them do whatever they wanted. If Zhang Yan resisted, then they would do as they wished and kill him on the spot. In this way, they wouldn't have to worry about him. Unexpectedly, this slight delay allowed the Taoist child to appear in time and save Zhang Yan. If he had known this would happen, he would have killed him directly. At this time, a muffled groan came from not far away. Everyone turned around and saw that after Zhang Yan left, Hu Xingyu couldn't help but let down his guard, allowing Ai Zhongwen to take the opportunity to escape from his grasp. After Ai Zhongwen walked far away, Hu Xingyu turned around and sneered, "Today, this Ai will remember the kindness of several senior brothers." Lin Yuan and the other two looked at each other. Chen Lan wanted to say something, but Lin Yuan waved his hand and stopped him. He said, "The situation is unclear. This matter will be discussed later. Let's see what the master has planned." Chen Lan's mouth twitched. He let out a "ha" but did not say anything in the end. Hu Xingyu stood at the side with a gloomy face. No one knew what he was thinking. The Good Abyss Temple was located on the main peak of the Azure Wu Mountain, Haojue Peak. Although Zhang Yan was a disciple of the Good Abyss Temple, it was his first time here. However, after entering the temple, he did not have time to observe the scenery on both sides. He was trying to guess the purpose of him coming here. This time, he single-handedly stopped the Guangyuan sect. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was famous among all the sections. It should be reasonable for the upper house to accept him as a disciple. However, he also knew that with the interests of all parties involved, even if there was such an outcome, his future might not be smooth sailing. However, how could there be no twists and turns on the path of cultivation? The fact that he was here today was enough to prove that the path of cultivation could only be overcome by brute force. There was no way out if one was overcautious. After passing through the three main halls, the Taoist child led him to the back of the temple and said, "Senior brother, please wait here. I will go and report to the masters." Zhang Yan nodded and the Taoist child entered the temple. Not long after, the Taoist child came out again and said, "Senior brother, the three masters are calling for you." Zhang Yan tidied his Taoist robe, adjusted his hair, and walked into the main hall without looking sideways. This main hall was called the Duzhen Hall. It was the highest on the Haojue Peak. The main hall was supported by 4 bronze cranes, and the stone statue of the black tortoise was below it. In the middle of the main hall, there was a purple copper incense burner. On the top of the burner, there were pictures of the masters of the Xian men and the deities. Upon closer inspection, there seemed to be a thin layer of clouds, and the atmosphere was mysterious. In front of him, there were 3 Daoren sitting on cattail hassocks. The white-haired Daoren in the middle was the master of the Good Abyss Temple, Shi Shoujing. On the left and right were He Shoushuan, the master of the Virtue Temple, and Zhen Shouzhong, the master of the Tai Peace Temple. As soon as Zhang Yan entered the main hall, Shi Shoujing's aura that was as deep as the sea immediately attracted his attention. He seemed to have felt this aura from Zhou Zishang before. At that time, it was not very obvious, but ever since he had deciphered the star stele, his perception of auras seemed to have been maintained in a sensitive state. He took a few steps forward and bowed. Disciple Zhang Yan greets the 3 masters. Shi Shoujing slowly opened his mouth and said, Zhang Yan, you have been here for more than 3 years, right? Zhang Yan replied, yes. Shi Shoujing made an "oh" sound and said, you have a deep understanding of the eroding runes. Let me ask you, where did you learn it? Zhang Yan replied, half is heaven's gift, half is man's gift. Shi Shoujing was startled and said with a smile, what a good half is heaven's gift, man. Heaven comes before man, and the later generation lives. If man does not act, what is the use of heaven's gift? You seem to know a lot. Sitting on the right was the master of the Virtue Temple, Zhen Shouzhong. Since Zhang Yan came in, he had kept his eyes closed and did not move. At this moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and said, Zhang Yan, you can leave now. This action was extremely sudden, and even stranger was that Shi Shoujing did not make a sound. Zhang Yan bowed respectfully and left with a calm expression. If it were anyone else, they would not have been able to say a few words before being ordered to leave. Even if they did not show fear, they would still be nervous. But Zhang Yan was calm from beginning to end. Shi Shoujing could not help but nod inwardly. Senior brother Shi, is it appropriate to accept Zhang Yan as a disciple? After Zhang Yan left, Zhen Shouzhong questioned him the moment he opened his mouth. There seemed to be a reproachful tone in his words. Shi Shoujing smiled faintly and said, Junior brother Zhen, you also saw that Zhang Yan's talent in the eroding runes is extraordinary. He fought off Guang Yuan under the cloud's sweeping peak by himself. He can be considered courageous and knowledgeable. After this assembly, his reputation will definitely soar. If we do not accept him, we will be criticized by other sections. They will say that our Good Abyss Temple is harshly preventing the younger generation from pursuing Tao. Moreover, as the master of the lower house, we should consider recruiting good people for the sect so that there will not be a talent left behind. Zhen Shouzhong said, I have observed Zhang Yan. Although his temperament is excellent, his aptitude is average. I fear that his future achievements will be limited. If we offend a group of disciples for this person, the gains will not make up for the losses. It's fine. Shi Shoujing smiled and shook his head. Junior brother Zhen, I will give the turbid suppression cauldron to Zhang Yan. What do you think? Zhen Shouzhong's eyes flashed when he heard this. He stroked his beard and said, if that's the case, very good. As soon as Zhang Yan stepped out of the main hall, the Taoist child who led the way just now came over and cupped his hands. He said, Senior brother, please follow me. Zhang Yan's heart moved. He followed the Taoist child to a side hall beside the Duzhen Hall. After the Taoist child left, he looked around. Although the place was clean and tidy, it was cold and silent. It was obvious that no one had lived here for a long time. However, he did not care. He found a praying mat and sat down, entering meditation. After an unknown amount of time, when he came out of meditation, he looked up and saw that Shi Shoujing was already sitting on the praying mat in front of him. Zhang Yan was shocked. He immediately stood up and bowed. He said respectfully, I did not know that exalted master would come. I have been impolite. Shi Shoujing, on the other hand, had a pleasant expression. His attitude was completely different from before. He said warmly, no need to stand on ceremony. Sit. When Zhang Yan sat down again, Shi Shoujing waved his horsetail whisk. He said, Zhang Yan, do you understand why I called you here? Disciple has been thinking about becoming a disciple day and night. Therefore, disciple believes that it should be this matter. Shi Shoujing chuckled. You are quite calm. Now that Zhang Yanjue had obtained this place, Shi Shoujing should be very clear about his thoughts. Since that was the case, why should he hide it? Therefore, he did not hide anything. Shi Shoujing said again, you sit a bit closer. Zhang Yan took a few steps forward and sat down 3 feet away from Shi Shoujing. Shi Shoujing looked at him carefully. He said, your aptitude is not high, and it will be difficult for you to reach great heights on the path of cultivation. However, you are quite insightful in the Tao of erosion runes. You can be considered a fated person. He took out a Taoist book from his sleeve and handed it to Zhang Yan. Take it. Zhang Yan did not ask what it was. He only stood up and respectfully received it. Shi Shoujing warned, this Taoist book is a superior technique for opening meridians. However, there are many forks in the road, and the slightest carelessness will destroy the foundation. However, I have observed it. It is indeed a first-rate immortal sect's ancient and authentic scripture. I cannot bear to discard it, so I hand it to you. Whether or not you want to cultivate it, you can decide for yourself. Then, he waved his horsetail whisk and closed his eyes. You have said all you have to say. You may leave. Zhang Yan hurriedly stood up and excused himself. When he walked out of the door, the Taoist boy at the door bowed. Congratulations, senior apprentice brother. Zhang Yan was startled. He said, why are you congratulating me? The Taoist boy chuckled. Senior apprentice brother, don't you know? Just now, Master passed down a decree before entering the pass. Senior apprentice brother is already the 13th disciple of Good Abyss Monastery. An inner disciple, Zhang Yan let out a long sigh of relief. He had put in a lot of effort to become an inner disciple, but when he heard the news, his heart did not waver at all. He nodded and cupped his hands at the Taoist boy. Thank you, junior apprentice brother. He then took out a source recovery pill and placed it in the Taoist boy's palm. The Taoist boy's eyes lit up. He recognized that it was a good thing. He looked around and carefully put it away. He moved closer and said in a low voice, there are still some miscellaneous things that Master mentioned to give to senior apprentice brother. I will send someone to deliver them to senior apprentice brother's cave abode. Don't worry, senior apprentice brother. Zhang Yan smiled to himself. Judging from the Taoist boy's tone, these miscellaneous things must have been difficult to move. If it was not for this pill, he would have to do it himself. If that's the case, thank you, junior apprentice brother. The Taoist boy beamed and said, not at all. Senior apprentice brother, take care. After coming down from Good Abyss Monastery, Zhang Yan was not in a hurry to return to his cave abode. Instead, he took 2 turns on the mountain road. When night fell and he confirmed that no one was spying on him, he returned to his cave abode. When he pushed the door open and entered, he saw that there was a large bronze cauldron in the middle of the cave abode. Chapter 19. Zhang Yan took a closer look at it. It was an ancient bronze tripod with 3 ancient words, suppressing turbid tripod, on it. Looking at it closely, he could feel a trace of the unique qi of cultivators. According to the Taoist boy, this cauldron should have been sent by Master Shi Shoujing. However, instead of giving him the Alchemy Tao book, he just had to give him a copper cauldron. What was the meaning of this? Everything the masters of the Xianmen did had a hidden meaning, and Shi Shoujing would not give him something for no reason. She must have wanted to use the cauldron to express something to him. Ding, ding, Zhang Yan paced back and forth, pondering over the mystery. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and thought of a possibility. Could it be that the guru was referring to Hercules? Although the name Hercules sounded awe-inspiring, those who truly knew him would never think so. This was because most of the strongmen were registered disciples without any foundation or rogue cultivators. Cultivating to the essence-building realm, if one was unable to open their meridians for a long time, then as they grew older, and past their peak period, the meridians would not be as strong as before, which would completely cut off the possibility of opening their meridians. Therefore, when some disciples knew that their path to immortality was hopeless, they simply dispersed all their vitality into their limbs and bones, using it to nourish their muscles and bones, turning them into a strong warrior. If one's cultivation could advance a step further, they could rely on the power of the sect to cultivate their body with secret medicines. They could also infuse their body with golden sand, which could make their body even more resilient. The so-called carry the cauldron strong man only referred to those cultivators who had become strong men in the essence-building realm. When it came to the upper house, there were titles such as mountain-pulling strongmen, ocean-overturning strongmen, sky-overturning strongmen, and so on. Although they seemed to be powerful, they were actually completely reliant on external objects. Moreover, they were cut off from the path of chi cultivation and were reduced to thugs of the sect. It could be said that they were completely tools in the hands of others. Zhang Yan had heard that because of the large appetites of those strong men, they would use a large cauldron to cook every meal. Could it be that Shi Shoujing was giving him a cauldron as a metaphor for his future, reminding him of the path he should choose in the future, hoping that he would become a strong man? The more he thought about it, the more likely it seemed. Shi Shoujing wanted him to take the initiative to concede and hand over the cultivation resources that originally belonged to him to the other disciples instead of fighting with them for them. Was this reminding him that the only way to protect himself was to walk a different path from everyone else? Zhang Yan snorted. This was enough to show that although Shi Shoujing had accepted him as an inner disciple, she did not think highly of his aptitude, nor did she think highly of his prospects. She had only reluctantly accepted him as an inner disciple for some reason. He glanced at the bronze cauldron and believed that when this cauldron was delivered, many people must have seen it along the way. Shi Shoujing might have even deliberately let the disciples know of this news. This was a clear and unmistakable signal to the outside world. Although the three masters had accepted Zhang Yan as a disciple, they had no intention of redistributing the cultivation resources. Instead, they had arranged for Zhang Yan to walk another path. Therefore, although the action of sending the cauldron seemed to be a tactful persuasion, in fact, it was the decision of the three masters that could not be changed. Zhang Yan sneered. How could his own path of cultivation be decided by others? He was not willing to be just a strong man. That was just a servant or a guard. What was the point of seeking that kind of longevity? The goal of immortal cultivation was to transcend. If he was enslaved by others, what was the point of becoming an immortal? What was the point of cultivating? As for Shi Shoujing saying that his achievements were limited, he was even more dismissive. He had come this far from being a registered disciple with no background. Hadn't he also become an inner disciple? It could be seen that the future was not always the same. The fact that he could come this far was proof. On the contrary, people like his predecessor who did not think of making progress and only waited for others to bestow upon them opportunities might have already been locked up by the Zhou family and sent back home to serve their wives and clans. Only by constantly improving one's cultivation was one's foundation. Everything else was just an illusion. Sneering, he circled around the cauldron twice. Zhang Yan's heart moved and a bold idea suddenly appeared in his mind. From the aura, he could feel that this cauldron was not an ordinary item. It could be considered an artifact. He didn't need to test it to know that if he put food in it, the cauldron would remove the impurities and boil the essence, so that it wouldn't swallow a large amount of useless impurities. At this moment, Zhang Yan saw another use from it. This cauldron itself had the effect of removing the impurities and retaining the essence. Once he thought of this, his eyes lit up. He immediately went out and circled around. He called many children to gather more dry firewood. He was now an inner disciple. Although the treatment was different from the children of the aristocratic families, his identity was real. He could even keep his own slaves. With one command from him, how could the children dare to disobey? Not only that, they'd even racked their brains for this matter, all for the sake of obtaining Zhang Yan's recognition. In their opinion, if they were able to obtain Zhang Yan's recognition, then perhaps they would be able to act like Bian Xiao and the others. Thus, in less than 2 hours, Zhang Yan's cave abode was filled with firewood that was enough to last him for half a month. Some of the Daoist children, thinking themselves clever, even caught some wild food and sent it over. Zhang Yan did not refuse and accepted all of them. Then, he chased the Daoist children out and blocked the stone that sealed the door. He divided the firewood into 15 piles, which corresponded to the number of half a month, so that the copper cauldron could steam it. Fortunately, the cave was spacious and he still had a place to stand. He gathered so much firewood, not to cook food, but to use the effect of the cauldron to attack with the cauldron's fire, to force out the qi in the Dan orifice and to temper it. He moved the copper cauldron to a pile of firewood and used a bamboo pipe to guide the spring water flowing down the stone wall into the cauldron. When it was halfway filled, he ignited the firewood below. Not long after, the water in the cauldron began to boil. He took off his clothes and jumped into the cauldron. Last time when he fought with Wang Lai, he learned that under the stimulation of the extreme environment, or at the moment of life and death, the Dan orifice could be opened and the qi overflowed. However, this method was too dangerous. Secondly, without a large number of elixirs, it was inevitable to make mistakes. It could be said to be an extremely extreme method. Now that he thought about it, if Chen Feng really wanted to use this method to temper his qi, then he might have had some difficulties and had to take the risk. According to his deduction, aside from other means, the elders of the sect should have a way to help the younger generation to temper their qi, which was more stable and less likely to cause accidents. In fact, what he thought was close to the truth. When the disciples of the aristocratic families reached the stage of tempering their qi, they would usually be helped by the elders to open the Dan orifice, guide the qi, and then slowly refine it themselves. This process was not a day, because the elders of the sect would also consume their qi, which depended on each person's cultivation. Generally speaking, it would take 1 to 4 hours a day, and then slowly meditate to recover qi. In about half a month, the qi would be completely refined. Therefore, this test was not difficult for the disciples who had the inheritance of magic arts. As for Zhang Yan, he did not have an elder to learn from, so he could only rely on himself. The heat in the cauldron was getting stronger and stronger. Zhang Yan had to start operating his qi to resist. At this time, he saw the magic of this cauldron. The firewood had been burning for a long time, but there was no smoke or fire in the entire cave, and even the walls of the cauldron were warm. However, the heat was not like ordinary steam, but it was constantly seeping into his muscles and bones. He knew that this was not ordinary steam, but equivalent to a master whose magic power was much higher than his, constantly using his qi to force him. Feeling a faint pain in his internal organs, he quickly swallowed a positive source Dan, and tried his best to drive his qi to resist the heat. However, the heat kept coming, making it hard for him to breathe. Gradually, the qi was consumed more and more, but he still tried his best to force out the qi from his almost dried-up meridians. He knew that this was the most critical moment. Even though his face was red, and his body was red as if it was cooked, he still clenched his teeth and persevered. After about a quarter of an hour, his qi was completely used up. At this time, there was a boom in his ears, and the tightly closed Dantian acupoint opened again. However, this time, because the external fire kept seeping in, the Dantian acupoint did not close. Instead, Yuan qi kept gushing out, fighting with the external fire. This Yuan qi was constantly consumed, and the turbid qi in the cauldron was constantly refined by the heat in the cauldron, and then turned into the purest qi. Zhang Yan's skin constantly seeped out black impurities. Even though this filth was stinky, he had no time to care about it at this moment. Once he felt that his body could not hold on any longer, he swallowed a Dan to protect his meridians and internal organs. Through his thoughts, he constantly guided them, vowing to squeeze out all the Yuan qi hidden deep in the Dantian acupoint. Every time a pile of firewood burned out, he would move it to another pile of firewood, so as not to interrupt the fire in the cauldron. For 3 days and 3 nights, Zhang Yan did not come out of his room, and only refined his yuan qi in the cauldron. After swallowing no less than 26 positive source dawn, the yuan qi in his body had been refined by more than half, but at this time he encountered a difficulty. No matter how hard he tried, there was still a last trace of yuan qi that had not been refined in his dantian acupoint. Just when he was feeling a little impatient, suddenly a sentence from the clear qi scripture suddenly flashed through his mind: the heart is dead, the spirit is alive, the qi moves on its own. His mind suddenly became clear. After refining his yuan qi to this point, it was already a matter of course. However, he was too anxious, and his thoughts were too heavy, causing him to lose the true meaning of the natural Tao law, causing the flow of his qi to be impeded. Instead, it caused his yuan qi to shrink, causing it to stop moving forward. At this moment, wasn't it similar to when he was in the essence-building realm? Thinking of this, Zhang Yan's mind became clear, and he stuffed the rest of the dawn into his mouth. He simply did not pay attention to the changes in the yuan qi, and just guarded his dan acupoint, as if his whole body was empty. Originally, he had already reached the last step, and was only a step away from the door. At this moment, he suddenly woke up, and understood the true meaning. The 3 treasures were quiet, and he no longer had any worries. While he was half awake, the last trace of yuan qi slowly rose from his dan acupoint. The turbid qi fell down heavily, yin and yang separated, and then combined with the previously refined yuan qi. After circulating 36 times in his meridians, it finally returned to his dan acupoint, and remained motionless. The firewood under the cauldron had burned out. Zhang Yan opened his eyes, and a flickering light flashed in his eyes. The originally dim interior of the immortal's cave was now as clear as day in his eyes. At this point, his cultivation had already reached perfection, and he had officially crossed the stage of quenching yuan qi to desolation. In one step, he had stepped into the realm of yuan qing, entering true. All of the internal qi in his body had already been transformed into yuan zhen qi, and his strength was more than 3 times what it was before. Both of his arms had the strength of 3,000 pounds, his eyes could see the stars in the sky, and he could see a quiet pond. Now, he only needed to spend some time to increase his yuan zhen qi, consolidate his realm, and then he would be able to open his meridians. Zhang Yan remembered the mysterious internal meditation manual, and thought, isn't this the heavens helping me? Even though this book was full of twists and turns, and was difficult for others, but he had the broken jade in his hand, so he could try again and again without fear of failure. When he succeeded in opening his meridians, he would like to see the expressions of those masters and disciples. He looked at the heavy and clumsy suppression cauldron under him, and it seemed that others could not wait for his cultivation progress to be too slow, so they specially came to help him. Thinking of this, he could not help but laugh, and recited in a clear voice, "Others use the cauldron to persuade me not to fight, but I use the cauldron to temper my yuan zhen qi, and the mortal heart of the Tao of heavenly secrets. All the calculations are for nothing." Chapter 20. Qianlan hurriedly walked into Lin Yuan's residence and said with a happy face, "Senior brother Lin, I heard that Guru Shi Shoujing has given the subduing turbidity cauldron to Zhang Yan." "Oh, are you serious?" Lin Yuan suddenly stood up, but his expression seemed to be a little doubtful. After Qianlan confirmed it, he looked up to the sky and laughed, "I have nothing to worry about." Giving the subduing turbidity cauldron to Zhang Yan was self-evident. Naturally, it was to make Zhang Yan behave himself, so that he could become a strong man. As for the alchemy books, he could forget about it. In this way, they would not have to divide their original gains just because there was one more disciple. Qianlan's expression was rather regretful. She said, "It's a pity for that cauldron. I heard that it was also refined by Guru Shi Shoujing many years ago when he was cultivating. It's specially used to refine medicinal pills and ingredients. Its effects are not inferior to ordinary instruments. Giving it to Zhang Yan is like casting pearls before swine. It doesn't matter. I don't know alchemy, nor will I become a strong man. What is the use of a cauldron? Lin Yuan was in a good mood and naturally did not care about such trifles. Moreover, he was quite disapproving of Chen Lan's words. What was an artifact worth? Once he opened his meridian channels and entered the upper courtyard, would there be a shortage of jade spirit shellfish, magical weapons, and medicinal pills? He sat down again, picked up the teacup and leisurely took a sip. Looking at Chen Lan, he suddenly smiled deeply. Junior brother Chen, did you hear that senior brother Zheng returned to the Zheng clan the day before yesterday? Chen Lan was startled, and then with a surprised look, he hesitantly said, Senior brother Zheng is ready to open his meridians? Yes. Why now? Chen Lan was somewhat puzzled. In addition to Zhang Yan, there were a total of 28 disciples in the lower courtyard. All of them were in the essence building realm, but there were only 5 who had reached the true realm and were ready to open their meridians. They were Jing Sun, Lin Yuan, Chen Lan, Zhen Luan, and Hu Xingyu. When the disciples of the profound sect opened their meridians, they not only needed the protection of their elders, but they also needed to take a lot of medicinal pills and cleanse their meridians in the Jade Liquid Pond acupuncture point. However, there were many disciples in the Xianmen aristocratic families. In order to train the disciples' temperament and strengthen their foundations, it would usually take 16 years from the beginning of cultivation to the opening of meridians. Chen Lan knew that Zheng Sun had only entered the sect for 10 years. Was he going to open his meridians now? There must be something fishy about this. Lin Yuan smiled proudly and said, there's naturally a reason for that. Oh, senior brother Lin, did you hear something again? Chen Lan's expression changed. He knew that Lin Yuan had a senior who was an elder in the Black Azure sect. He could always find out some unknown inside information. Lin Yuan moved closer and said in a low voice, I heard that the upper house won a small battle with the 3 lake demons this time and finally obtained the lustrous cloud shell field. However, they also suffered heavy casualties. Even the 6 direct disciples of the upper house who were at the clear chi stage were killed by a python spirit from the jade blood pool. An elite disciple? Chen Lan cried out involuntarily. Is there a need for that? As the disciples of the lower house were mostly from the Xianmen aristocratic families, they were all nurtured as the backbone of the sect. Once they opened their meridians, they could become an elite disciple. Elixirs, books, divine sand and spirit shells would all be given to them by the sect. They did not need to be like those disciples who were passed on from master to disciple. They did not need to fight at the front when their cultivation was low. They only needed to sit and enjoy the fruits of the sect's labor. They could still be killed like that. Chen Lan felt that it was unbelievable when he heard this news. Could it be that the 3 lake demons had attacked the Black Azure sect? However, Lin Yuan smiled coldly and said disdainfully, that was their own fault. I don't know what those senior brothers were thinking. I heard that the old python of the jade blood pool, Luo Mengzi, had a girl named Luo Zhenjin. She had a beauty that could make the moon and flowers blush. They actually wanted to see her true face. Who knew that they would be targeted by a python spirit and lose their lives? Chen Lan could not help but have a look of disdain when he heard this. Cultivators painstakingly seek Tao just to live forever. Yet they actually lusted after a mere woman. Moreover, it was a witch. Their death was really not to be regretted. But, what does this have to do with senior brother Zheng? One of the senior brothers was originally a disciple of the Zheng clan. Zheng Sun was summoned back this time to enter the upper house and inherit the fortune left by this senior brother. Lin Yuan's voice revealed some envy. Chen Lan clicked his tongue and said, then for senior brother Zheng, isn't it a good death for his clansmen? He knew that Lin Yuan also had 2 clan brothers who were also cultivating in the upper house. At this moment, looking at Lin Yuan's expression, he could not help but have some malicious guesses. Then, he seemed to think of something and his body quivered. He stood up and bowed to Lin Yuan. He said respectfully, with senior brother Zheng gone, senior brother Lin will be the eldest disciple of the lower house. I will have to rely on senior brother to take care of me in the future. Lin Yuan laughed out loud and helped Qianlan up. He said, "Junior brother, you don't have to do this. How can the relationship between us be compared to others?" The two of them exchanged some pleasantries and sat down again. Qianlan casually asked, "I wonder what happened to the python spirit that killed my disciple. I heard that it is being chased by Ning Chongxian from my sect. There is still no news of it until now." Ning Chongxian. Qianlan thought about it and seemed to remember this person. Rumor has it that this person's talent is outstanding. He became an expert of the mystic light stage after only cultivating for 40 years. He even said that he is only one step away from entering the core transformation stage. I wonder if it is true. Lin Yuan snorted and said, "No matter how powerful this person is, he is still a cultivator without a foundation. After all, the sect still needs us and the disciples of the aristocratic families to hold the fort." At this moment, near the Azure Parasol Mountain, two rays of light were flying like lightning. In front was a ray of black profound light, and a black armored python was wriggling inside it. A white sword light was chasing after it, and a young cultivator with a cold expression could be vaguely seen on the sword light. He shouted coldly, "How dare you fly on a cloud in front of me, Ning Chongxian?" A streak of green light shot out from the white sword light and pierced through the clouds in front of it. It then rushed back and forth a few times, and the python spirit suddenly let out a miserable howl. Along with a few drops of thick blood splashing out, the black light wrapped around its body suddenly became a bit thinner. The python spirit knew that it was not good to stay in the sky after being severely injured, so it had no choice but to descend from the clouds. It opened its mouth and spat out a ball of rolling demonic clouds to protect itself. The pitch-black clouds soon covered the entire mountain below it. "You dare to show off your insignificant skills again?" Ning Chongxian sneered. His eyes focused, and two flickering golden rays shot out of his eyes. This was the barrier-breaking spiritual light that could only be used by late-stage mystic light realm cultivators. As soon as the light touched the demonic clouds, it was like the scorching sun melting snow, and everything it passed by was swept away. Seeing this, the python spirit could not help but speak the human language. However, it started cursing as soon as it opened its mouth. Pfft. This Ning Chongxian has only cultivated for over 40 years, and he has already reached the mysterious light-penetrating object realm. I, Luo Shao, have cultivated for over 200 years, and I have only just reached the spiritual light initial illumination realm. How unfair is the heavenly Tao! Although it wanted to avoid the attack, it was currently severely injured and its movements were slow. It could only keep using its true essence to spit out black gas in an attempt to hide its true body. However, it could not hide as soon as Ning Chongxian released a spiritual light. The python spirit panicked and fled among the rocks and trees. At this time, it saw the undulating mountains and the sound of flowing water in front of it. It seemed that there was a glimmer of hope, so it quickly swam over. However, it could not find the cave after searching for a long time. Seeing that its true essence was gradually running out, it knew that as long as Ning Chongshuan's sword came down, its head would definitely be cut in half. It could not help but feel despair. Oh no, there is no cover here, and there is no earth aperture. Am I going to die here today? Right at this moment, his eyes caught a glimpse of a mountain stream on the cliff. It seemed to lead to an acupoint. Without hesitation, he used up all his remaining Yuanjin energy and shrunk his 30 feet long body to the size of a foot. Then, he dove into the water and swam along the stream into the acupoint. He drilled all the way into the depths of the mountain. After the sword light in the sky repeatedly circled the mountain peak several times, it descended again, and Ning Chongshuan's figure stood firmly on the peak. He frowned. The python spirit suddenly disappeared, so it must have drilled into the ground. At this time, unless the entire mountain peak was split open, there was no way to deal with this python spirit for a while. However, even if he had the ability to do so, it was impossible for him to wreak havoc here, because this was the territory of the lower house of Yingsang sect. He walked down the mountain path, but he did not find any trace of the python spirit. At this moment, he suddenly sensed an orthodox profound aura and could not help but be surprised. Ah, this is a desolate place. Is there a disciple of the lower house cultivating here? He followed the direction of the aura, and not long after, he saw a young cultivator meditating on a rock that protruded from the cliff. That person seemed to have also sensed someone coming from behind, but he calmly stopped his cultivation and turned around. Ning Chongxian nodded and looked at him with admiration. Who are you? The young cultivator looked at Ning Chongxian cautiously and cupped his hands. I'm a disciple of the lower house of Yingcang sect, Zhang Yan. How should I address you, senior brother? I'm Ning Chongxian, a disciple of the upper house. I've been chasing a snake demon for so long, and this demon has killed several of my true disciples. Have you noticed anything unusual? Zhang Yan shook his head. No. Ning Chongxian asked again, let me ask you, why are you alone here? I'm an inner disciple, so I can live alone on this peak. Zhang Yan did not move out of his cave residence, but no one dared to live next to him, so they all looked for other places to live. Moreover, this stargazing peak was already remote, so he was the only one left on the entire mountain. In this way, he did not need to hide in his cave residence to cultivate, so he came to the mountainside to meditate. Ning Xianchong frowned when he heard this and asked coldly, you're an inner disciple? Yes. Ning Xianchong could not help but show a look of disgust on his face. Almost all the disciples of the lower house came from aristocratic families. These people could not only occupy a blessed place in the upper house, but they could also enjoy the fruits of the sect without going out to fight. Ordinary disciples like him, on the other hand, had to fight for everything they needed with their lives, so he was particularly disgusted with these people. He did not bother to say a word and snorted coldly. He immediately flew up on his sword and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Seeing the other party fly away, Zhang Yan's eyes were slightly envious. He wondered when he would be able to cultivate to this level. However, this thought was immediately thrown to the side. He had his own path, and others had theirs. What was there to be envious about? As long as his heart was firm and he kept moving forward, he would naturally be able to soar into the sky one day. Zhang Yan looked at the vast night sky again, smiled slightly, and turned to go down the mountain. Turning back along the plank road, he soon returned to the cave residence. However, the moment he opened the door and stepped into the cave residence, he suddenly paused. Ever since he observed the star developing steel that day, he had always been sensitive to changes in chi activity. Even if there was a slight change in the environment, he could still feel it. At this time, he clearly sensed a strange chi activity hidden in the cave residence. He glanced around, and his eyes finally stopped on the bronze cauldron. Chapter 21. Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes slightly and closed the door calmly. As if he had not discovered anything, he walked to the side of the praying mat and sat down. After a while, the faint sound of his breathing could be heard from the cave dwelling. The surroundings gradually quieted down, as if everything was as usual. 2 hours later, the sky was already a little bright. Zhang Yan suddenly opened his slightly closed eyes. Without any warning, he leaped up and conveniently picked up the lid of the bronze cauldron beside him. He strode to the side of the cauldron, turned his hand over, and firmly closed the cauldron with a dang sound. As soon as the cauldron lid was closed, the cauldron began to rumble. The top of the cauldron rattled as if something was struggling to get out. Zhang Yan had already determined that the snake demon was hiding in the cauldron, but he was not in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he waited for the other party to relax a little before launching an attack. At this moment, he retreated to the door in 2 steps and stared closely at the cauldron. He did not dare to relax for even a moment. If the cauldron lid was really pushed open, he could only escape first. However, his worry was unnecessary. No matter what, this bronze cauldron was still a magic tool. Moreover, it had been personally refined by Shi Shoujing and could be used to cook ferocious beasts alive. How could it be easily pushed open? The snake demon was seriously injured and was in someone else's cave dwelling. At first, when it was in the cauldron, it was always on guard and did not dare to make any strange movements. However, Zhang Yan did not move at all, as if he did not notice its existence. After persisting for a long time, it was finally overcome by exhaustion. It did not expect that its negligence would allow Zhang Yan to seize the opportunity. The snake demon desperately struggled for a long time, but the cauldron lid did not move at all. Knowing that this cauldron was not simple, it could only helplessly give up and stop wasting its strength. When the cauldron quieted down, Zhang Yan walked to the side of the cauldron and said, "You are that snake demon?" The snake demon said, "Fellow Taoist, why did you lock me here? You snuck into my cave abode and even killed 5 of my Dark Azure sect's disciples. Tell me, why should I imprison you? So you already know my origins." The snake spirit sighed and defended himself. "I was only forced to hide in the cauldron because I had nowhere else to go. I have no intention of harming you. Please let me out. I will definitely repay your kindness in the future." Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "I can't believe what you said, not to mention that senior apprentice brother Ning might not have gone far. If you come out of my immortal cave and get caught, then your death is a small matter, but this Zhang cannot explain it clearly, so whether you harm my heart or not, I cannot let you go." The snake spirit suddenly heard a rustling sound and was alarmed. "What are you doing?" Zhang Yan said with a smile, "This cauldron is called the turbid suppression cauldron. It's good for cooking delicacies and boiling the essence. I've never tried it before. Today, I'll use you to taste it." The snake spirit turned pale with fright and struggled desperately in the cauldron, but it was futile. In the end, he could not help but plead, "What do you want for you to let me go?" Zhang Yan secretly smiled. This was getting interesting. If he really wanted to kill the snake spirit, why did he have to talk so much nonsense? He just wanted to ask a few things clearly. "Let me ask you, why did you come to Dark Azure sect's territory?" The snake spirit stammered, "Just to kill those 5 disciples, there's no other reason." Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? You dare to lie to me with such lies? My Dark Azure sect has been fighting with the 3 lake demons for many years. Although there have been casualties on both sides, we have never attacked each other's territory. But this time, you didn't hesitate to chase into my sect's hinterland just to kill a few disciples whose cultivation is lower than yours. Who are you trying to fool?" Zhang Yan sneered. "They must know some secret of yours, so you can't let them live. Otherwise, why would you chase after us so relentlessly?" The snake spirit was shocked and secretly complained. It did not expect that it would be so difficult to deal with a junior of the Dark Azure sect. He had guessed the whole story, but he was seriously injured and had used up a lot of true energy to transform. At this moment, he was like a lamp that had run out of oil and could not summon any strength. He could only let the other party slaughter him. However, in its heart, it was still hoping to get lucky and refused to tell the truth honestly. It tried to avoid the topic and talked about many secrets and trivial matters of the 2 sects, hoping that Zhang Yan would not pay attention to this matter. However, Zhang Yan remained unmoved. He lit a fire and continued to add firewood under the cauldron. Not long after, the temperature in the cauldron gradually rose. Originally, when the lid of the cauldron was open, Zhang Yan could not endure it. Although the snake spirit's cultivation was higher than his, it was seriously injured and its vitality was seriously consumed. There was not a bit of spiritual energy in its body. After being attacked by the cauldron fire, it could not bear it anymore and loudly begged for mercy. Don't burn, I'm willing to say. Zhang Yan did not stop and said coldly, "Speak." The snake demon was helpless and could only say everything he knew in full detail. It turned out that the snake spirit was called Luo Shao. This time, when he was fighting with a disciple of the Dark Azure sect, he accidentally ran into a cave. After going there out of curiosity, he found a shell field that had never been discovered by anyone. He could not help but be overjoyed. Unfortunately, this place was also discovered by a few disciples of the Yutzang sect who were following it. Its murderous intent was aroused, and it did not hesitate to break into the territory of the Yutzang sect to kill these disciples. However, at this time, it accidentally bumped into Ning Chongxian. After being chased all the way, it panicked and hid here. Shell field. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. This was the place where the spirit shells were produced. The golden beads inside the spirit shells were essential for alchemy. After the shell was ground into powder, it was also a commonly used material to refine magic tools. Moreover, the spirit shells were glossy and had a strong spiritual energy. They looked really good, so cultivators used them as currency. Wasn't the reason why the Dark Azure sect had been fighting for more than 10 years for a shell field? With a shell field, it was equivalent to holding gold and silver mines in the secular world. It would be difficult for them not to become rich. Every big sect had several shell fields behind them. No wonder the snake spirit took such a huge risk to kill those 5 disciples. Even he could not help but be tempted. Thinking of this, he asked again, apart from you, who else knows about this? No one, no one. After Luo Xiao said this, he seemed to feel that something was wrong and hurriedly added, apart from me, no one else can find that place. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and said, I can let you out, but how can I trust you? Luo Xiao hurriedly said, I am willing to swear. Zhang Yan shook his head, empty words and white teeth, not trustworthy. I am willing to make a dharma contract. It's too troublesome, not desirable. Zhang Yan knew a little about dharma contracts, but firstly, he did not have a contract paper, secondly, he did not have a cinnabar talisman brush to write on, and thirdly, he did not dare to let the snake spirit out easily, so he immediately rejected it. The snake spirit became anxious and said, then what do you want? Zhang Yan slowly said, you and I will make a blood oath. The snake spirit cried out involuntarily, what? Zhang Yan asked, could it be that you think it's not feasible? The snake spirit shrunk in the cauldron and did not make a sound. Zhang Yan smiled and continued to add firewood to the cauldron. After a while, the snake spirit couldn't take it anymore and shouted, once the essence blood oath is made, I will be connected to your heart. If you die, I won't be able to live either. I might as well die now, only this method can make me feel at ease. Zhang Yan sneered, if you are not willing, I will immediately cook you into a pot of snake soup. Don't think that I won't dare to kill you because I know the shellfish site is there. In my opinion, only what is in my hands and what is eaten is mine. Those things that are too far away, things that cannot be seen or touched, are not worth mentioning. After hearing the words eat, the snake spirit trembled in fright. Feeling that Zhang Yan was adding firewood, she could not help but scream in panic, don't burn, I agree. Open the lid of the cauldron, I will give you my blood. Zhang Yan laughed and teased, don't think I don't understand. I, Zhang Yan, have also read many Taoist books. The blood oath is bound by the heavenly Tao, why do I need to open the lid of the cauldron? If you continue to play tricks, I will skin you and remove your bones. Luo Xiao saw that he did not reveal any flaws and could only helplessly force out a strand of Yuanzhen's blood essence from her heart acupoint. Then, she formed a spell and obediently swore the blood oath. Zhang Yan's body shook, as if something was imprinted in his heart. Every movement of the snake spirit in the cauldron was incomparably reflected in his heart. He knew that this was the effect of the blood oath. Thus, he took 2 steps forward and lifted the lid of the cauldron. Not caring about the snake spirit, he minded his own business and meditated. A moment later, a small golden snake about a foot long crawled out from the cauldron. The snake's head rested weakly on the cauldron's edge. It looked left and right, glancing back and forth at Zhang Yan's face a few times. It then glanced at the Taoist book beside his hand. It couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. Mysterious Inner Meditation Manual. Who wants to harm you? Zhang Yan frowned, opened his eyes and said, why do you say that? Luo Xiao chuckled and said, Although I have not seen this Taoist book before, I have long heard of its great name. I heard that the method recorded in this book is ancient and orthodox. It can open meridians and break through in 10 months. However, there is one disadvantage, which is that it will easily attract the jealousy of the heavens. Therefore, one must not hear the sound of thunder for a month after opening meridians. Otherwise, Yuanjin will definitely be shaken and the immortal meridians will be broken. From then on, one will have no fate with the path of Tao. It then said hatefully, could it be that I have made a blood oath that my life is linked to yours? I can't be bothered to talk to you. Hearing this, Zhang Yan was shocked and his back immediately broke out in a cold sweat. If what Luo Xiao said was true, then even if he had the remnant of the jade in his hand, he would inevitably fall into this trap. He did not expect that there would be a big trap waiting for him here. After pondering for a while, Zhang Yan asked, how did you know about this? The cultivation of the demon race is different from the cultivation of the human race. In the early stages, there will be countless big and small tribulations. From a young age, one must know how to avoid the tribulations. Therefore, this Taoist book was once mentioned by the elders. Zhang Yan nodded and asked again, since you know the secret of this book, do you know how to avoid it? Seeing that Zhang Yan was asking him seriously, Luo Xiao could not help but show off. He said proudly, you have asked the right person. Perhaps others do not know, but I, Luo Xiao, know very well. After you open your meridians, you only need to dig a deep hole. When the thunder is about to strike, immediately cover your mouth, ears, eyes, and nose and hide inside. Then, bury yourself in the soil. This way, after 7 days, you can avoid the tribulation. Chapter 22. I'm seriously injured right now and all the elixirs I brought with me were lost along the way. Can you help me find some elixirs? It'll be beneficial to you as well. Although Luo Xiao had helped Zhang Yan avoid a disaster earlier, Zhang Yan still flatly refused. No. You shouldn't go out now. Ning Chongxian didn't find you this time, so I'm sure he hasn't gone far. Maybe he's waiting for you to walk right into his trap. Luo Xiao shuddered. He thought about it and felt that what Zhang Yan said made sense. He couldn't help but curse, that Ning Chongxian isn't a good person either. Now that I think about it, he had the chance to save those disciples but he watched me kill them before making a move. He's got ulterior motives. Zhang Yan shook his head. The water in the lower house of the Yingtsang sect was already so deep, let alone the upper house. But before he opened his meridians, these things were too far away for him and he couldn't be bothered to think about it. Luo Xiao walked around the cauldron irritably. He suddenly thought of something and asked, let me ask you, since you're a disciple of the lower house of the Yingtsang sect, do you have a good relationship with an inner disciple? An inner disciple? Zhang Yan smiled and said, I am. Luo Xiao was stunned and immediately said angrily, you're an inner disciple. Then you must be from an aristocratic family. Why would you lack elixirs? Could it be that you can't bear to? I even told you the secret of heaven to help you cultivate. If I knew this, I would have died with you. Zhang Yan didn't expect Luo Xiao to react so fiercely. Afraid that it would cause a misunderstanding, he immediately explained, I'm not from an aristocratic family. I entered the sect just now, 3 days ago. You're not from an aristocratic family? Luo Xiao was startled, but after knowing the whole story, his eyes suddenly became complicated. A cultivator without any background could start from the lower house of the Yingtsang sect? This was too unbelievable to him. After a while, he snorted and said, then it's easy. How? Zhang Yan didn't understand. Luo Xiao laughed aloud and said, you are an inner disciple of Yingtsang sect's lower house, who knows how many princes and dukes in the world want to curry favor with you, what do you think we should do? Zhang Yan couldn't help but be surprised. Just as he was about to ask again, he heard someone outside the door say, Senior Brother Zhang, are you here? An old friend, Zhao Yuan, has come to visit. Is that Senior Brother Zhao? As soon as he heard this voice, Zhang Yan could tell that it was Zhao Yuan. He glanced at Luo Xiao, and the latter immediately shrank back into the cauldron. Zhang Yan closed the lid of the cauldron, tidied up his clothes, and walked to the door to open it. Outside the door was Zhao Yuan. However, he was a bit reserved when facing Zhang Yan. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother Zhang, I greet you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Senior martial brother Zhao, it's been a long time since you came to see me." Carefully looking at Zhao Yuan, he saw that he still hadn't reached the essence building realm. Moreover, his cheeks were sunken in, his eyes were lifeless, and his sideburns were gray. It was obvious that he had damaged his Dao foundation because of his eagerness for success. Perhaps he would not be able to take a step forward in his life. In his heart, he couldn't help but sigh in pity. Seeing that Zhang Yan's attitude was still the same as before, Zhao Yuan was slightly relieved. A trace of a smile appeared on his face, and he said, "Junior martial brother, I have come before, but after senior brother Zhang came back from the monastery, you went into seclusion until now. I think you were trying to comprehend a superior Dao law, so I did not dare to disturb you." Zhao Yuan was older than Zhang Yan, but still addressed him as junior martial brother. Zhang Yan did not deliberately correct him, but now that their status had changed, and he was now an inner disciple, how could Zhao Yuan dare to call himself a senior martial brother? However, no matter how he addressed Zhao Yuan, he did not dare to say anything. "Yes, I was in seclusion, and neglected senior martial brother Zhao." Zhang Yan stepped aside and said, "Senior martial brother, please come inside." Zhao Yuan stepped into the immortal cave, and the two of them sat down as host and guest. He looked around, and sighed with emotion, "This place is quiet, but senior martial brother's status is different now, so you should find a few people to take care of the mundane things. I have only been an inner disciple for 3 days, so I don't have enough time to gather servants. Besides, I am wholeheartedly cultivating, so I don't have time to think about these trivial things." Inner disciples kept servants to show their status. Furthermore, these servants could help them deal with worldly affairs and dealings with their families. These servants were brought over from their families, so they could be trusted. However, Zhang Yan's foundation was shallow, so how could he dare to recruit servants with unknown backgrounds? Zhang Shi was a good choice, but he was old, and the situation in the lower courtyard was treacherous. If he became an inner disciple, it would inevitably cause some people to be dissatisfied, but they would not dare to make a move against him, so he temporarily did not plan to do so. "Senior martial brother Zhao, why do you have time to come here today?" Zhao Yuan sighed, and an apologetic expression appeared on his face. He stood up and said, "Last time, my little sister caused a lot of trouble for senior martial brother Zhang." Before he finished speaking, Zhang Yan reached out and pressed him down, saying with a smile, "Such a small matter, brother Zhao, why do you need to take it to heart? If it wasn't for your little sister, I might not have reached this step today." What he said was not wrong. If it wasn't for Zhao Ying, perhaps Bian Xia would not have come to Qianzhang Cliff to cause trouble, and Ai Zhongwen would not have taken the initiative to visit. The world changed in a strange way, and mortals could not predict it. Zhao Yuan thought of something, and he sighed slightly, saying, "That was senior martial brother's fated chance." Zhang Yan frowned slightly. Zhao Yuan had fallen because of the word fortuitous encounter. However, since he had no hope of cultivating, it wasn't good for him to say anything about it, so he changed the topic and said, "Xianwen seemed to have met your younger sister once on Cloud Sweeping Peak. May I know who her master is?" Zhao Yuan shook his head and said, "Junior martial brother, I don't know either. I only know that it's a Kun Daoist who lives in Tai Peace Temple, but I've never seen him in person." Nowadays, there were 2 types of inheritance for cultivators. One was inheritance from noble families, and the other was inheritance from master to disciple. In the Donghua continent alone, the major sects were all controlled by noble families. Zhao Yuan's words made it very likely that Zhao Ying was a disciple of master. That Taoist nun seemed to be an elder of Zhao Ying's sect. Zhang Yan still remembered the favor he owed her and had always wanted to return it. However, it seemed that Zhao Yuan had no hope of cultivating, so this opportunity would probably have to be found in the future. At this time, Zhao Yuan coughed and said with a slightly troubled expression, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang, Senior Marshal Brother Zhao, there's no harm in saying what you want to say." Zhao Yuan revealed a slightly cautious expression and said slowly, "My Zhao family has been merchants for generations. When it came to my grandfather's generation, we were once taken care of by a noble. Now this noble's nephew wants to get to know Senior Marshal Brother Zhang. I wonder." When he said this, he could not help but feel nervous. He kept observing Zhang Yan's expression, afraid that he would show any displeasure. He knew his own situation well. When it came to helping, it was Zhang Yan who helped him the most. Zhao Ying had even caused some trouble for Zhang Yan. What he said before was just polite words. It was just that this person really did the Zhao family a favor, so he had no choice but to shamelessly ask for help. Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "For such a small matter, next time Senior Marshal Brother Zhao does not need to come personally, just write a letter." Zhao Yuan was startled. He did not expect Zhang Yan to be so easy to talk to. His expression also became a little excited. This person is waiting at the foot of the mountain. If it is convenient for Junior Marshal Brother, can you call her up now? After saying this, he looked eagerly at Zhang Yan, afraid that he would refuse. Oh. Zhang Yan could not help but be surprised. The noble mentioned by Zhao Yuan must be of a high status. Why would she wait at the foot of the mountain to see him? In fact, he was a bit undervaluing himself. He was a disciple of the lower house of the Yingcang sect. This identity was enough to make people in the secular world look at him. What kind of place was the lower house? It was the place where the sect cultivated the future core disciples. In the future, the elders and even the head of the Yingcang sect might appear among these people. Many people would rather not cultivate Taoism in order to make friends with these new disciples. When a new disciple went to the upper house, he or she would have a paradise to himself. They could also choose a few registered disciples from the lower house who they were on good terms to go to the upper house to be their own future team. And in the eyes of outsiders, Zhang Yan was destined to be a true disciple of the Yingcang sect in the future. Once he opened his meridians and went to the upper house, he would definitely marry into a mysterious family. After that, even if he did not come out of the sect would still give him pills, books, magic treasures, and spiritual weapons. His cultivation would still rise. Such a person could not even be curried favor with normally. If Zhang Yan was willing to give them face, those who came to court his favor could trample the mountain path of the rippling cloud's peak. And since Zhang Yan started cultivating, almost everyone said that his talent was not high. Even he himself thought so. But in reality, people who could cultivate qi and cultivate Taoism were already 1 in 10,000, and those who could cultivate to his level were even rarer. In the territory of the Donghua continent, other than the 16 major sects, there were countless small sections. Some small sects even used up the entire power of the sect to help one person open their meridians. Even so, they could still call the wind and summon the rain in a state or a county, and be regarded as a superior. Zhang Yan could not help but ask, "Who is this person?" Zhao Yuan said, "This person is the daughter of the Wei dynasty's High Duke Song, Princess Linya, Chao Ying. She specially came here to pay her respects to senior brother Zhang." Hearing that this was the identity of this noble person, Zhang Yan did not care much. He was now a member of the Xianmen. Emperors, generals, and ministers could only control ordinary people, and could not control him. As long as it was not a cultivator, there was no difference in status in his eyes. Zhao Yuan bowed and hurried away. To Zhang Yan, this woman's identity was not important, but to Zhao Yuan, she was the daughter of the High Duke. He could not neglect her, so he had to personally welcome her. About 4 hours later, when it was almost noon, Zhao Yuan led a woman in men's clothing over. This woman was about 27 or 28 years old. She was tall, with phoenix eyes and slender eyebrows. When she looked around, there was a faint sense of majesty. In addition, there were more than 100 servants and guards behind her, which made her look even more noble. It was Princess Linya, Chao Ying. All of you wait here. Do not summon me, and do not come forward at will, lest you anger Celestial Master. Everyone bowed together, but did not dare to respond. It was obvious that they had been instructed beforehand. Princess, please follow me. Zhao Yuan led the way in front. Chao Ying's face was slightly reserved. She nodded and said, "Thank you, Mr. Zhao." Walking along the plank road, Chao Ying stepped into the cave and saw Zhang Yan sitting on a praying mat. She went up and bowed respectfully, saying, "Ordinary woman Chao Ying greets Celestial Master Zhang." Zhang Yan did not pay attention to her. Instead, he turned to Zhao Yuan and said, "Senior brother Zhao, come and sit here." Chao Ying was shocked. It seemed that Zhao Yuan's position in Celestial Master Zhang's heart was far beyond her imagination. She was afraid that the way she treated the Zhao family would have to change in the future. Zhao Yuan repeatedly said that he did not dare. In the end, under Chao Ying's persuasion, he reluctantly stood next to Zhang Yan. However, he refused to sit down no matter what. Zhang Yan let him be. He then looked at Chao Ying and said, "You are Chao Ying?" Chao Ying bowed again and said, "Yes, I am." As the Countess of Cliff, she was usually bossy in the public house. She did not even spare a glance at many princes and nobles. However, in front of Zhang Yan, she trembled with fear and did not even dare to breathe loudly. She also knew about Zhang Yan. He defeated 3 disciples from the lower house of Guangyuan faction at the peak of drifting clouds all by himself. This caused Guangyuan faction to lose face and had to leave in defeat. What kind of ability was this? In her eyes, Guangyuan faction was already a big immortal faction. In her eyes, Yingcang faction was even more unattainable. Moreover, Zhang Yan would sooner or later become a true disciple of the upper house. She was actually able to get to know this person through Zhao Yuan before he went to the upper house. She had to say that it was her family's fortune. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Why are you looking for me?" Chao Ying raised her head and said, "I heard that Celestial Master Zhang is already an inner disciple. I am willing to offer 1,000 pounds of 5 elements holy sand as an offering." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.